Now, if you're going to be working in any type of Microsoft administration services these days, there are some fundamental principles that are very important that you understand. So what I want to do is I want to get into some of the foundations of understanding things like Microsoft domains, understanding some of the networking technologies, RAS and VPNs and virtualization, and also we're going to talk about the cloud services and how all that fits into this. But it's important to kind of start from the beginning so you can understand where things have been, understand where things are going, and you have to consider the fact that the world is transitioning now more into a cloud-oriented environment, but in the past everything was managed on-prem or on-premise, and we got to talk about this transition and how things were and how things are now and where Microsoft is going. So to start with, we go back in time to the 1950s, 1960s. They had mainframes, these gigantic computers that would take up like entire rooms. They used vacuum tubes. And then as we moved into the 1970s, something miraculous happened. They created what was known as an IC, an integrated circuit, which allowed basically binary math to be processed through little chips, and this is where personal computing became popular. So in the 1980s, personal computers started coming out. I'm going to draw this little symbol here to represent a computer, and I tell you what, I'm going to create another little symbol here to kind of represent a bunch of computers. So in the 1980s, companies started buying PCs and personal computers, and they started showing up in people's offices, and eventually, they were networking them together and all of that. And so this is where things really get started. Now, of course, in those days, one of the problems was we lived in what was called a peer-to-peer network. So what would happen is these computers you could network these computers together with various technologies, but there was no centralization, meaning each computer was equal. There was no computer that controls all the other computers. A network admin would have to, if they wanted to make changes, they'd have to sit down at each and every computer to make those changes or get users to help them, which was always a nightmare. And so that didn't, it worked, but it didn't work very efficiently, all right? Now, as we moved into the 1990s, there was a company that was gaining ground called Novell, and they had a product called NetWare, which was the idea of that was to use a server that would help manage machines and also allow people to share files easier, whereas in a peer-to-peer network back originally, these machines would have to share files with each other and people would have to know each other's passwords. It just didn't work very well. Well, eventually with the creation of the file server concept, you had a more powerful machine that you could share files on and all that, and eventually Novell even came out with the idea of a server that could manage other machines. Now this is kind of where Microsoft comes in. Microsoft created their product called NT, and they created this concept of a domain controller, which is a special type of server that can manage these other servers. Now, fast forward, they came out with what was known as a domain, but fast forward to the year 2000, Microsoft releases their newest domain technology, and they call it Active Directory. And Active Directory domains were represented by a triangle. All right, and a domain controller was a server essentially that had a database on it, and that database was the Active Directory database. So let's just kind of fix that here. This little cylinder looking thing I'm going to make here is going to represent my Active Directory database. So AD. All right, and this is what we still call to this day. We call it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services, and usually if you hear that term Active Directory Domain Services, it means it's an on-premise domain. So anyway, you would always want to have more than one domain controller. The reason you want to have more than one domain controller is because the same reason you have more than one of any type of server really. One reason being to break up the disbursement of load. These machines will authenticate with these domain controllers, and the more machines you got, you don't want all of that just going to one domain controller, right? The other consideration is redundancy. If you only have one and that server goes down, well, you're in trouble, right? So we want to have multiple. The other thing about domain controllers that are interesting is that they replicate. So, for example, I'm going to make a little smiley face guy here, and this little smiley face guy is going to represent my user. So we create a user account on a domain controller. Now the interesting thing about user accounts, or the interesting thing really about domain controllers, is that they replicate. So everything you do on one will replicate over to the other. So if I create a user account on that first one, well, replication is going to occur between both of them. And so this little arrow thing I'm going to make here is going to represent replication. So domain controllers replicate. That means that this user could log on to any one of these thousands machines, and it's going to, you know, authenticate with the domain controller. All right. The authentication protocol that is used is the protocol known as Kerberos. All right. Kerberos is the authentication protocol. What is a protocol? It's like a language, basically. Okay. Now there was an older protocol that it also supported called NTLM. That was for legacy, for older prior to the year 2000 machines. Now that protocol allowed us to have encrypted passwords and all that, and authenticate securely and all that fun stuff. The other thing is Active Directory uses a language known as the Directory Service Language, and that language was called LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. Now all that is, again, this is all decades old at this point. At the time when it came out, it was cutting edge, but it is a bit dated nowadays. But it still works, and it's still pretty secure, though there are some considerations on security that I'm not going to explain right now. Now the other thing that's important about Active Directory is that all machines have to have a name. And the name must be, of course, associated with an IP address and all of that. And so there is a service that we use it on the internet all the time, called DNS, Domain Name Service. Our domain must have a name. Usually when you name your domain, you would name it after your company, and a lot of people even name their domains based on their web presence. So for example, my domain might be called examlabpractice.com. That's my company, my web presence. And I'm going to need to have a server in my domain that can associate the names and IP addresses together. So that server is called a DNS server. DNS, Domain Name System Server. And that server will also have to have a little database on it. And that database will be our DNS database. Okay. So we'll just draw another little cylinder, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this, border it with red, and then I'm going to color code the database red, which means that this database, the DNS database, is associated with that name. Now what happens is our machines, clients, domain controllers, we also might even have, let's draw a file server over here. Pretty common that we have file servers in our environment. Okay. All of these machines would register with our DNS. All right, and this allows for the centralization of name resolution, meaning they register their IP addresses into this database, and then now anytime a machine needs to find another machine, it can query DNS. So for example, these machines all have to authenticate by your domain controllers. They can query DNS and say, hey DNS, do you know what the address is of one of my domain controllers so I can authenticate? And DNS can reply back and say, yeah, here is the information. At that point, the client can go and authenticate. So it works very efficiently. Now all of this together, this idea of domain controllers, this triangle you see here, this provides centralization. So we moved away from peer-to-peer networking back in the day where, you know, every machine was kind of its own boss and there was no centralized way of managing things, to now we are working in a centralized environment. These domain controllers help us centralize. This DNS service helps us centralize. So we now have some central control over things. One of the great things about our domain controllers too is we have these wonderful things called GPOs, group policy objects. A group policy object is this object that you can create that has all these settings, parameters, you know, any type of attribute you want to configure or change on machines, you can do it through a GPO. So for example, if your boss walks up to you and says, hey, I want you to force the firewalls to be turned on all these machines. I want to make sure that the antivirus is always up to date. I want you to disable some of the wallpaper feature. I don't want people putting crazy wallpapers on their machine. So, I mean, the sky's the limit. There are literally thousands of things you can do inside of a GPO, but what happens is that GPO can instruct these machines to turn things on and turn things off. GPOs also replicate, so when you create a GPO on a domain controller, it replicates over to the other domain controller. So it doesn't matter which machines, authenticate with which domain controller. All right, so these GPOs can be deployed out to these machines, and this is how you turn things on, turn things off. You could even deploy software with that if you wanted to. So it was very, very powerful, a very, very powerful system for managing everything. All right. Of course, let's throw the internet into the mix here. Let's say that this little cloud is going to represent the the internet, and let's talk about a little bit about how that sort of fits into the picture. Let me just clean it up here with the mighty stroke of my paintbrush. I will clean up the internet. All right. All right, so then we have the internet, right? So maybe we've got an internet connection that's coming in here. All right, and of course you don't want to just leave your internal network exposed, so your company would generally have a firewall, right? And we'll just put that firewall right here. And so now we have a secure way for traffic to flow out to the internet, and the only things that can come in would be things that we send out, and we could allow things through that firewall if we want to. Now, this is a traditional domain. This is the way we've done things for 20 years, all right? And in this next little section, I want to talk about expansion on all of this and where things have gone with things like RAS and all that, and VPN and virtualization. So that'll wrap this little section up, and we'll move on to the next. I now want to talk about some concepts that are also sort of the foundation of how we've done things over the years. It's important to understand how we've done things over the years so we can understand how things are now. So looking back, we have an Active Directory domain, ADDS as it's called, Active Directory Domain Services, which uses the LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, which uses Kerberos for authentication, or for the legacy back in the 90s devices that used NTLM, New Technology LAN Manager, which isn't all very new these days, but even Kerberos is pretty old considering we've been using it for decades, and I think actually the protocol even came out back in the 1980s. So, we got some data technologies, but the technologies have been updated, a lot of them over the years, to be secure, so you can still feel comfortable using those. But let's talk about some different scenarios now. The first thing I want to look at is the scenario of what happens when we have a user who is not at the office. So this person is working from home. Working from home is a lot more popular nowadays than it has been in the past, so it's very common. And this person needs the ability perhaps to be able to connect in and access services that are inside. Okay, we've got a file server, but ultimately you probably are aware that in the past it was always this mindset of do it yourself, host your own server. So your companies might have a file server, but then they might also have a they might have a SQL database server that users need to access. Let's create that SQL. All right. Maybe Microsoft Exchange. That was email, right? Microsoft Exchange was used for email, and then maybe even like SharePoint was very popular by Microsoft on premise. So here you've got these these four servers providing a service to our devices, and you've got users working from home and everything else needing to get access to those. Let me just kind of move those a little bit over here, make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to shrink those down just a little bit as well. All right, So this user who is working from home needs to access these services, but the person is not, not around. Well, let me tell you what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't just open up all the ports on the firewall and allow this person in to get access to these devices unsecurely. In fact, in the 90s, a lot of companies did that. The very first company I ever worked for, back in the 90s, they didn't really have a firewall, so you literally could share out you had a public address, and you could connect to it from home. It was really scary when I think about it. Even in the 90s, that was scary, but nowadays it's incredibly scary. Why is it scary? Because you got these people out there that want to do things that they shouldn't do, and get access to companies' data and try to do damage and ransom and all of that, ransomware and all that. And who are these people? Well, we generally call them hackers, right? So let me draw a little hacker. This little box here is going to represent my hacker. All right, and let's make this hacker look like he's up to no good. All right, I'm gonna give him let's give him like a devil horns, some devil horns here, and maybe he's in a bad mood. I'll give him a frowny face, and give him some fangs, and maybe the fangs are dripping blood okay, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away. All right, but anyway, that's going to be my hacker. All right, goofy looking little hacker person. All right, and so we don't want this hacker spying on my user. We don't want this hacker getting access to resources inside. So how do we get around that? Well, usually the way we would do that is you would use a VPN, a virtual private network. So the way you would do that is you could purchase what was called a VPN concentrator, and basically it's a device that allows secure connections in. But in the Microsoft world, we actually had a type of server we could set up called a RAS server, or also known as an RAS server because it stood for Routing and Remote Access Services. But anyway, remote access services is the idea here, and with that we have support for VPN. Now what does that do? This allows this thing called a VPN tunnel to be created, which means that you have this encrypted communications that goes through to that RAS server, and then from there that RAS server allows you to access other resources securely. This hacker will not be able to see the traffic that's flowing through because it's all encrypted. The only thing the hacker would be able to see is that it was going up to this firewall, and that would be it. Wouldn't be able to see what the traffic said. So this is how we would definitely help secure things. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about here is what happens when a company needs to have a service that is exposed to the internet. For example, let's say that your company is going to host their own web server, okay? So you set up a web server. All right, maybe this is going to be www.examlabpractice.com or whatever, and people from the internet need to be able to get to it anonymously. Well, how are you going to do that? Where are you going to put that web server? Are you going to put it internally inside the domain like you see here? And the reason that's scary is because you would have to open up port 443, port 80, which is the HTTP ports, to allow traffic to get in, which means not only could somebody out there on the internet anonymously get into this web server, but technically so could a hacker. And if a hacker was ever to gain access over this website by hacking it, then something called pivoting could occur, where a hacker could actually gain access to these other services that are on your network. And so that's where things are really scary. So you definitely won't want to host it internally most of the time, although there was a way to do something called a reverse proxy. I won't get into that right now. But we would probably want to put this outside, right? So we want to put it out here. But there's something else that's a problem on that. If you put it outside that firewall, you don't have to worry about people getting allowing traffic to come in. But the scary thing about that is the fact that this poor web server is now completely exposed to the internet, so with no protection. So the way around that usually is people would get another firewall. So you'd have two firewalls. This first firewall would be called the internal connected firewall, and then this firewall here would be called the external connected firewall. Now this little network between that, we would call that a DMZ, demilitarized zone, or now the more popular term is perimeter network. Okay, so DMZ, perimeter network are basically the same thing. All right, and so now what you would do is you would only open the ports like port 80, 443, 53 for DNS if you put DNS in there, whatever ports there that you need, and now traffic would be able to get to this web server. Okay, and so even if a hacker, somehow hacks this web server, you're not going to allow traffic to pass through this firewall and get to these resources. The only traffic that you might allow would be VPN. Okay, and there's a bunch of authentication and all that has to happen to make that work. All right, so that's the idea of remote access and VPNs in a nutshell for you, as well as the concept of DMZ and the perimeter network idea. Now, the final thing I want to look at with you in this video is the idea of virtualization. So I talked about how in the past it was always the mindset was we got to host everything ourselves. We got to have our own little data center. We got to have our we got to have our own servers, file server, SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, all that, and it's all got to be hosted by us. And that's the way things have always been done. All right. Now, then what you'll find is as time went on, a company called VMware came out with a way of expanding on virtualization. Just so you know, virtualization is not a new term. Virtualization has been around for a very long time. In fact, the term hypervisor is essentially the software that lets us emulate hardware. And if you can emulate hardware, you can also store software on that emulated hardware. That's the idea of virtualization. That term hypervisor has been around since the 1970s. The idea of even mainframes dividing up processing time and doing shared computing was a form of virtualization. So this is not a new concept, but VMware, they expanded on this idea, and the thing that they did that really pushed the envelope on all this was that, hey, you don't necessarily need 4 different servers. And here's the other thing. Here's the other crazy thing. If you wanted redundancy for those 4 servers, you'd really need 8 servers, right? You could do clustering those together. So you'd have 8 servers to provide redundancy for those. But with virtualization, I can set up a hypervisor server, 1 server, and virtualize those other servers. Now, in the Microsoft world, we call that Hyper-V. That is the software that does this, Hyper-V, hypervisor. Microsoft is not the one that came up with that. VMware is not the first to ever come up with that. VMware was the biggest contributor to this concept, though, so I do have to give them credit where credit is due. All right, now the other beautiful thing, though, about this is you get a really, really powerful machine. You virtualize your machines on those. You get these things called checkpoints in Microsoft. They used to be called snapshots, and a lot of other companies still call them snapshots, where you can make changes without the worry of breaking anything because you can revert back to before the change was made. The other thing that's wonderful about using virtualization is if I want to have complete redundancy, I don't have to have 8 servers. I could literally, purchase another server and have a copy of the virtual machines on that other server. Now I've only got 2 servers as opposed to having to have a total of 8 servers. Okay, so this is a very powerful feature capability that kind of started everything. Another thing that we got, and this is kind of where you start thinking about cloud computing, is with virtualization comes the term elasticity, which basically means that each of these machines can be given a certain amount of RAM processing power, but here's what's interesting about that. If one of the servers isn't using all of the available RAM that it's been given, it can share it with other servers. So for example, this file server has been given more RAM than it needs, and then SQL needs that RAM. The file server can give up some of that RAM over to SQL, and when SQL's done using that extra memory, it can release it back to everybody. It's basically a pool type scenario where it gets released into a pool of RAM and pool of CPU, and they can grow and shrink as they need. And that's a small way of sort of on-premise way of looking at elasticity. Of course, when you get into cloud computing, you'll learn that can expand across multiple machines across the board in these big data centers. But not to get into that just yet here. But that's the idea. Hopefully that now helps you with understanding that concept of what virtualization is. And with that is really where, you know, cloud computing started to come into play, which I'm not explaining in this video. But hopefully now you have a much better understanding of the concept of the RAS, VPN, as well the DMZ concepts and virtualization. And now in this next section, we'll start getting into the concept of cloud services. So with the creation of virtualization, it got companies thinking. Companies like Amazon and Google and Intel and IBM and eventually even Microsoft that, hey, we've got these massive data centers. Why not allow people to pay us to host their virtual machines on our data center? So in other words, we can get people to pay us money to host their virtual machines, and they don't have to deal with all the headaches of dealing with everything on premise. So this is really the idea of where cloud services came from. And so I'm going to draw this kind of big cloud here. This is going to represent cloud computing, if you will, and we'll have a connection coming down here, okay? And I will just kind of clean that up a little bit, make it somewhat look nice. So this being, you know, the big thing is this is not a new concept of, if you think about humans as a whole, we have offered services for years. I know how to change the oil in my car, but I don't necessarily enjoy doing it. So I can pay a mechanic shop the fee, and they will do it for me as a service, right? Well, this is the idea of cloud services. So there's some acronyms I want to introduce you to. The first one being the term IaaS, and that is infrastructure as a service. So infrastructure as a service means the cloud provider is offering their infrastructure for a fee as a service, okay? So the idea being something like this: instead of me having to host my virtual machines and all that in my on-premise environment, I can pay this cloud company to host virtual machines for me. They can also host a virtual network for you. They can host, they can have storage that's offered to you. They can have firewalls, virtual firewalls that are associated on those virtual networks, and virtual load balancers. Okay, they can have apps out there that are available. They can have virtual databases that are hosted in the cloud. So essentially just about anything you could imagine that you can host on premise can be hosted out there in the cloud service. Now, Amazon, Google, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, these various companies offer this Microsoft's cloud service that does this. Their IaaS service is called Azure. Now, let me just kind of clarify. You may pronounce that name, that word, a little different than I do, Azure or Azure or Azure. Actually, years ago when I was first learning Azure, I actually went to the internet and started watching videos of the developers that created Azure, and the first few developers that I watched, that's how they pronounced it. They pronounced it Azure. So that's how I just assumed that it needed to be pronounced. Of course, I learned later down the road that not all the developers even agree on how to pronounce that word. Some of them pronounced it Azure, Azure, Azure. I've even heard somebody pronounce it Azure. So this is one of those tomato, pronounce that word any way you want to pronounce it. That's how I say it, which is Azure. Okay. So Azure is Microsoft's official infrastructure as a service. And the way that it all works is you pay a fee for what you use every month. Basically, how much CPU, memory, storage, network, all of that you use, that's what you're going to pay for. Okay. Now, there are some other terms, other acronyms that I want to introduce you to. There is an acronym called PaaS, which stands for Platform as a Service, and an acronym called SaaS, which is Software as a Service. Now, the idea there being that there are, well, we'll start with Software as a Service first. Software as a service, the idea is that there is a fully functional app or application that is 100% ready for you to start using, or your users to start using. All you got to do is just jump right in and start using it. Okay, so there are some Azure services that are software as a service. There's also what are called platforms as a service. Now, platform as a service is kind of there's a little bit more work involved from an admin standpoint. So a platform as a service means there is some type of software platform that is available for you to start using, and it's 100% ready for you to use, but you have to go and administer it and use it before it's going to really do anything. A good example of this is Microsoft's directory services in the cloud is called Intra ID. Intra ID. All right. Which I want to make, it's very important that you realize that this was formerly called Azure AD, and there's still a lot of documentation out there that refers to this as Azure AD. So it's very important that that you are aware of that. Now, you are taking my course right now, and you should realize that I have hundreds of hours of videos that I've got to update that involve that term Azure AD. There are literally hundreds of hours that I have recorded using the term Azure AD, and I'm in the process of updating videos, but be aware that I don't have them all upgraded. So you may hear me refer in the course to stuff as Azure AD. I actually have a video on this for you to watch after these foundation videos. It's a video that says do not skip. So please do not skip that video. Make sure you watch that video because it's going to talk about this name change. So anyway, the name is now Intra ID. It's just a name change. They changed it to Azure AD. The services are pretty much all the same. It's just a name change. Okay, so Intra ID is a platform as a service. Now, it is Microsoft's directory services. This is where your user accounts and passwords and groups and permissions, role permissions, and all that are all managed through Intra ID, formerly Azure AD. Okay, whereas on-premise in a domain, we called it ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. All right, and I think that's part of the reason Microsoft changed the name, to kind of distinguish the difference between the on-premise Active Directory and the former Active Directory, Azure AD, to Intra ID. Anyway, this platform as a service is ready for you to use, but there's only like one user, and that's the admin, and then you're responsible for going in there as an admin and adding users and controlling things. That's why it's a platform as a service. It's not 100% ready, set up. You have to administer it. Now, Microsoft's main platform as a service functions and software as a service, they have something called Microsoft 365. So there's really two parts to the Microsoft Cloud Service. There's Azure, which is mostly focused on the IaaS side of things. And don't get me wrong, in Azure there are also some platform as a services and software as a services, but it's mostly geared towards IaaS. Whereas Microsoft 365 is mostly geared towards platform as a service. Now, these two are very related. Microsoft 365 sits on top of Azure. You can't have Microsoft 365 without Azure. And if you create an Azure account, then it'll allow you to automatically create a Microsoft 365 account. So these are all related. You're not just going to create an Azure account or not just going to create a Microsoft 365 account. They're pretty much linked together. Okay. Now, in the Microsoft 365 services, you have lots of platform as a services and software as a service. For example, we have what are called the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, which that was formerly called Office 365, and that's the downloadable version of the Microsoft 365 apps, formerly the Office 365 apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of that. And there is also something called Office for the Web. Now that is fully a software as a service. The Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, that is actually a mix. It's a platform as a service and a software as a service. Most people refer to it as a software as a service because they're downloadable apps. But as an admin, from an admin standpoint, we have to administer that. So the administration side of it is platform as a service. Office for the Web is 100% software as a service. These are web-based versions of the Office apps that are ready for your users to use. Once they get a license, they can use it. Okay. Then we have Exchange Online. Okay, so the administration side of that is a platform as a service, but the user side of that is a software as a service, right? And then we've got SharePoint Online, which is the same idea. It's a, admin side is a platform as a service, but the user side, which is what most everybody focuses on, is a software as a service. We have Microsoft Teams, same thing for that. Okay, for messaging and all of that fun stuff. We have a product called Intune, which is an incredibly powerful product. Mobile device management, mobile application management. Intune is what is sort of taking the place of GPOs in the cloud. So on premise, we could control the settings and parameters and attributes, and we could deploy software and all that using GPOs on premise. Well, now when it comes to the cloud service, we can use Intune. We can actually control on-premise machines from Intune. So it is very, very powerful, an incredibly powerful product. Then we've got OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is a cloud-based storage that users can have access to. So anyway, there's actually so many products that are cloud-based products. There's no way I could put them all in here, but here's some of the main things. Now, as far as the licensing and all of that, with Azure, you are paying for what you use, CPU, RAM, storage, and network. But for the Microsoft 365 services, you have what are called subscriptions, and you purchase a subscription with a certain amount of licenses. So, for example, if I purchase a Microsoft 365 subscription, I can purchase a certain amount of licenses, and I can issue those out to my users, and I will pay a monthly fee for however many licenses that I've got with my subscription. Okay, and that's just giving you a basic understanding of how that works exactly. Okay, so ultimately, though, if I could kind of color code this, we'll say that the Azure side of this, IaaS, and again, Azure does have some platform as a service stuff as well as software as a service, but it's mostly geared to be a infrastructure as a service. And then the Microsoft 365 is mostly platform as a service, software as a service. So if I was to kind of draw a, kind of just draw around these, we would say that these right here are all geared towards Microsoft 365, and then these are geared towards the infrastructure service, which is Azure. And both of these, Azure and Microsoft 365, they share Intra ID. They share Intra ID, okay? Yellow or red and blue make purple, right? Okay, so they actually, you create users in the Azure side or the Microsoft 365 side, you're going to see the same users because they are linked together. They share the same directory service, so it's important to understand that. Now, the other piece of this is, what about situations where you want to link all this together? So it's not uncommon nowadays for companies, to have this triangle, to have this on-premise domain, and then also start utilizing Microsoft's cloud services. And then, for years and years, they've always pushed this thing called SSO. SSO is single sign-on, where you have a user has a user account, and that user account gives them access to everything they need. Well, we don't get SSO if you have to have a user account to access things in your domain and then a different user to access things in the cloud, right? Well, Microsoft has ways around that. They actually have services that you can use for linking these together. And that service, let me just kind of move some of this around a little bit so I can make a little bit more room. We'll put the DNS server there. We'll move this little RAS server down over here. And the server is called Microsoft Intra Connect. And it was formerly Azure AD Connect. Okay, so again, it's called Intra Connect now, and it used to be called Azure AD Connect. And I like to refer to it with the old name as well, just because, be advised, you really kind of need to know the old name as well, because there's still a lot of documentation that will refer to this as the older name. The newer name is Intra Connect. The older name is Azure AD Connect. But this was a server you could set up on premise, and what it would do is it'll synchronize your user accounts out to the cloud. So your on-premise user accounts would get synchronized. So whatever users you have on-premise, and you don't have to synchronize them all, you could pick and choose which one you synchronize, but your user accounts are going to sync out to intra ID. And now what will happen is you have this thing called seamless SSO, where when your users log on to the domain, it logs them on in both places. They log on to the on-premise domain as well as in the cloud, which is really, really cool. Now that is a heavier weight version. There is actually a lighter weight version that's a very, very lightweight application. You don't actually have to dedicate a server to it like they kind of want you to with Connect. There is actually another lighter weight tool called IntraSync or Intra ID Sync, which is a lighter weight. Now there's some pluses and minuses to go in either route, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the traditional way to do this was to use this here, IntraConnect, formerly Azure AD Connect. Now the other thing I'll tell you is this does not sync back. So it would sync users out, but it won't sync users that are created out in the cloud back to on-premise. You cannot currently do that. You can't synchronize users that are created in Intra ID down here. But any users can be synced out, and it'll even make it where if they change their password, like out in the cloud, it'll sync that as well. So anyway, that kind of gives you a rundown of that. Now, I'll also tell you that Microsoft is moving away from domains. In fact, if you if you've got an on-premise domain like what you see here, then yeah, it's a great idea to utilize this. But if you're a new company, and this really pains me to say it because I have fed my family for over 2 decades by not only teaching about Active Directory on-premise, but also implementing Active Directory on-premise as a consultant. And so it kind of pains me to say this, but as a consultant now, I'm not even recommending that newer companies implement a domain anymore. A lot of companies are now moving to the cloud, and there's ups and downs of that. But to be honest with you, in most cases, your company gets out cheaper by utilizing cloud services. Okay. And so nowadays you can actually set up on-premise machines and manage them through Intune and things like that are in the cloud. You can even have client machines hosted in the cloud, but I'm not going to dive into that right now. Ultimately, though, if you are a company that's been around for a while, then the traditional approach that you see here, where you've got a domain, and then you're starting to move into the cloud, you can set up IntraConnect, formerly Azure AD Connect, or Intra ID Sync, and which is the lighter weight version, and you can have things synchronized out to the cloud. All right, well, hopefully these foundation videos have been instructional to you. I hope you got a lot out of this and you're ready to move on. Now, one of the first things that you got to keep in mind when you're dealing with operating systems is, well, how am I going to deploy that operating system, and what are the tools that are available? And before you can jump in and start working with hands-on, it's very important that you understand the concepts of what's available in terms of deployment tools. So I want to kind of go through that with you right now. Here we are looking at some information on deployment tools and what are the different deployment options that are available. So of course the first thing we could do is we could just do the good old-fashioned fresh install, or what's called a high-touch installation, or some people refer to it as a high-touch deployment. And that is basically just taking a copy of Windows on a flash drive, or if you still have DVDs, you could use a DVD and you could pop that into a computer and you could boot off that flash drive or off that DVD or whatever, and you could install Windows fresh on the computer. It's bootable, so you could boot off of it. You could blow away whatever's on the hard drive and install the operating system fresh. Now, the great thing about that is it's easy. It doesn't take a lot of technical abilities, a lot of setup. It's great if you're just going to install 1 or 2 machines. Now, of course, when you start getting into the concepts of, well, what happens if I've got to deploy a lot of machines? What if I got to do 20 or 30 or 50 machines, at a time? Then that's where the fresh install kind of falls apart. Number one, you don't want to be running around with 50 flash drives in your hand or 50 DVDs and popping them in computers and installing. But number two, one of the other issues that you run into there is that it's not going to install any applications. You're just going to get the fresh install of the operating system. So what if what if your boss walks up to you and says, hey, I need to deploy 50 machines. We need these 50 machines set up by next week sometime. And of course, you got to do it as quickly as possible. Running around 50 flash drives or DVDs or whatever is probably not going to be the quickest way to get that done, right? So there are other options. You have imaging, of course. Imaging using Windows ADK and the MDT, which I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. But so this Windows ADK, which we're going to talk about more, and the MDT we're going to talk about more. But the Windows ADK is the Windows Assessment and Deployment Toolkit. This is essentially a tool that is, or a toolkit that's going to basically bring a bunch of tools and make those tools available for you. It's one download. It's free. You download it off Microsoft's website. You get it for free. It extracts all these tools and it makes these tools available for you to utilize imaging. Okay. And this is you can also download what is called MDT, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, to go with that. And the way you sort of want to look at it is the MDT, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, is like a workbench. So imagine that you're a carpenter or something, and you're gonna build something. Okay, the MDT is like your workbench. Okay, it's a space to help you organize this whole process of imaging. Okay, and then the Windows ADK is the various tools and, if you will, machinery that would be used, right? If you were a carpenter and you were building something, you'd have various machines to help you do that, various tools to help you do that. The Windows ADK is what that is. So it's a kit of tools, essentially, that are going to help you with this deployment. And the MDT is a graphical interface that's going to help you keep everything organized. Now, with these two things, they're both free. You can achieve what they call a light touch installation, or LTI. Okay, light touch installation essentially means that you're gonna start a deployment over the network to a machine, and when you go through that process of making this deployment occur, you're still going to have to put your hands on the computers a little bit. It's not going to automate every little process for you. Okay. It's essentially going to require you to start each machine and run a command to either capture an image or deploy an image. It's going to be very quick. It's not going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot faster than running around with 50 DVDs or flash drives in your hand or whatever, but you are still going to have to put your hands on each computer. Okay, that's why they call it a light touch installation. Now, you can utilize what's called the MDT as well as Endpoint Configuration Manager. You might be familiar with SCCM. You might have heard of that over the years. System Center Configuration Manager. Now, it did get a name change to Endpoint Configuration Manager, but it's a product that you can purchase and you can license. It's a very powerful product, and with that, you can automate the entire process, and you can achieve what is known as a zero-touch installation, which basically means that you can have this piece of the server software that's going to communicate with your machines and automate the process of capturing images and deploying images. Okay, now I'm not going to get into a lot of depth on that right now. Just understand that basic idea. Let's keep it simple in this particular video. That's the idea. It's going to automate the whole process, and you can achieve what they call ZTI, or zero touch installation. Okay. The next is Windows Autopilot. Now, if you want to say, okay, there's a new way of doing things, this is the newer way of doing things, Autopilot. And it isn't all that new. It's been out for years now, but it's new to a lot of people. Whereas the imaging idea has been around since the 1990s. Autopilot, has just been around a few years. So it's a newer idea. And the idea of Autopilot, you're going to use in the Microsoft world, you use what's called Intune. Intune is Microsoft's MAM product. That's mobile device management, mobile application management product. It's a cloud-based product. And basically what happens is you can buy new machines and you can register what is known as a device ID for each of those machines. Now, I'm not getting into the details of all that in this video, but basically you register the device IDs of these machines, and as long as these machines, when they boot up, and have an internet connection, they can communicate with Intune in the cloud, and they'll automatically do this, which is really neat. And Intune can configure these machines. Now, if you think about one of the things you hate about new machines, you go out and buy new machines that already have Windows installed, and Windows comes with all this crappy software that you don't want that's installed through the vendor. Like maybe you purchased a bunch of computers from Dell or HP or somebody like that. Well, you've bought all this software, you bought all these computers with this software you don't want. Windows Autopilot can actually wipe all that crappy software away. You can get rid of it, and it will reconfigure everything for you. Now, Autopilot is an Intune-based system. You do have to have a license for Intune. On the flip side, there is a thing called provisioning packages. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. That is similar to Autopilot, that doesn't cost any money. But Autopilot is a licensed-based thing. Good news is, if you get a lot of the Microsoft 365 licenses, you automatically get it. So it's just included as a license that you can get. You're not paying any extra money. So if you really want to know what Microsoft wants you to really focus on these days, it's Autopilot. That's the process. The imaging system is an older idea. It's a great concept, but Autopilot doesn't require you to blow away machines and redeploy anything. Autopilot lets you reconfigure things, or what they call reprovision things, as opposed to blowing something away and redoing it. So that's what Autopilot is in a nutshell. Not going to get into a lot more depth in this video. Then you have an in-place upgrade. In-place upgrade is a real simple idea. You have an older version of Windows and you upgrade to the new version of Windows. Okay. And the great thing about doing an in-place upgrade is, if you do an in-place upgrade, you don't have to reinstall any kind of software or any of that. The software will go with you. The downside of doing an in-place upgrade is sometimes if you have an older operating system that has some software that's sort of corrupted and has problems, when you do that in-place upgrade to the new version of Windows, that corrupted software goes into that new version. So the downside of that is you may have problems that come from the old operating system to the new operating system. All right, let's talk about Windows ADK a little bit more. So I was telling you that Windows ADK is sort of like it's a toolkit, right? It's free. You download it off Microsoft's website. It gives you all these various tools that will assist you with dealing with Windows deployments. All right. So the first thing is the Application Compatibility Toolkit. This is called ACT. And right now, and really this is all you need to focus on. You don't have to be an expert on every one of these, but you need to know just a little bit about each one. And that's what we're looking at in this video, okay? So the Application Compatibility Toolkit is, again, it comes with Windows ADK. It's free. You install that. And the neat thing about it is it has the ability, you install it on a computer in your environment, and you can tell it to scan other computers in your environment, and it will inventory what software is on those computers and tell you if there's going to be any incompatibility issues. So for example, let's say you're running an older version of Windows and you're going to be going into a newer version of Windows, and you're worried about compatibility problems. Maybe you have some older software that you bought like 10 years ago. And this is something we all run into in IT probably. As a consultant, I can tell you that I've ran into this so many times where, I come into somewhere and to do a job, and what happens is you get a company that they bought software 10 years ago and they spent a lot of money on the licensing for it. They don't want to let go of it. Because they spent all that money. And so basically what ends up happening is they want to hold on to it for 10 years or 15 years. And so now you got this old software that was meant for a very old version of Windows, and they're wanting to run it on this new version of Windows. Maybe it runs on the current version it's on, but then you've got a new version of Windows that just came out, and you need it to run on that new version. Well, ACT, the great thing about it is it can download this database of what are called patches and shims. And it can scan your network and tell you if any of your software is incompatible, and then it could potentially allow you to install these little patches or shims, these little pieces of software that could fix compatibility problems. So it'll scan, it'll tell you, hey, you got this piece of software that's not compatible with the new version of Windows. So if you do deploy the new version of Windows, it's not going to work. However, it might have a patch that you can deploy that'll fix that. So then you have User State Migration Tool, or USMT. Okay, so User State Migration Tool it's actually a command line tool, that has two little programs in it that are usually used. One is called scan state, one is called load state. And this is used for migration. So what's a migration? The idea would be you have a user who is going to be, maybe they have an old computer, it's out of date, it's outdated, and they're going to be getting a new computer. And of course, what's that user going to stress about? The user is going to be worried about all their stuff, right? All of my data is on this old computer, and I want to move it over to the new computer. So by doing what's called a scan state, it will back up all of their data, and you can back it up wherever you want. You can back it up to a flash drive or back it up across the network. And then you can do a load state to the new computer, and it'll restore everything, and it'll put it all right back as closely as it possibly can to the way it was on that old on the old computer to be on the new computer. And that, so you could even be going from an older operating system to a newer operating system, and it should be able to sort of match up where things should go on the computer. That's the idea of user state migration tool. Then you have DISM, Deployment Imaging, Servicing, and Management. So we talked about what a light touch deployment, a light touch installation, all that is. DISM is a command line tool that can capture images on a hard drive. So it can capture all the data, store it into what's called a WIM file, which is a Windows imaging file. And then you can deploy that out to a new computer. So when we talk about the Windows ADK, we talk about MDT and all that. DISM is a tool that does the capturing, all right, of images and deployment of images. Then you have Volume Activation Management Tool, VAMPed. Volume Activation Management Tool is a tool that will scan all the computers in your network and tell you which computers are activated and which computers are not activated. So it's a great way just to get an inventory of machines in your environment to make sure that all the machines are activated. You can actually even activate machines remotely using that tool. Then you have ICD, the Imaging Configuration Designer. Image Configuration Designer is what we use to build what are called provisioning packages. So I was talking about Autopilot a little earlier. Autopilot is a cloud-based solution that usually you're going to use Intune in the Microsoft world to use it. And the idea is, and if you get a new computer, instead of blowing away the machine and putting a new image on it, you can reconfigure the machine. Even if you buy a new computer and it's got a bunch of old software on it, or a bunch of software that's been put on it from somebody like Dell or HP, you can use these little things called provisioning packages and run. You can build these provisioning packages, and they're basically just little files that have everything in it that you want to change about a computer, including you can tell Windows to just basically wipe off all software that's not native to Windows. In other words, if Dell or HP has put a bunch of crap software on the computer you don't want, it'll just wipe it off. And then you can also tell it, hey, I want to install this piece of software. Hey, I want you to reconfigure the settings on Windows to do certain features or have certain features turned on or off, and it'll do that. That's what a provisioning package will do. Same thing Autopilot Intune can do, but ICD is free. It doesn't cost anything. Now, the downside of that is it's an on-premise based solution, so it doesn't, the great thing about Autopilot is the computers could be traveling. They could be anywhere in the world, and they could be reconfigured. With Imaging Configuration Designer, you do have to have network connectivity in an on-premise environment. And that kind of gives you an idea in a nutshell. Again, that's all I'm doing in this video, is just giving you some information to as an overview here. All right, so we're not looking in any depth on these right now. Then you have UEV, User Experience Virtualization. What this is a way of storing. So Microsoft had roaming profiles back in the day. Roaming profiles allowed a user to have all of their this person's desktop settings, shortcuts, screensaver, wallpaper, and when they jump from one Windows machine to another on the network, if they moved around, all that would follow them. Well, roaming profiles was not a very efficient way to do it. So user experience virtualization is a newer way to do things where it's more efficient than roaming profiles. But I will tell you a little secret about that. They've kind of deprecated this now. They still kind of want you to know what it is, but ultimately they've moved to a better way of doing it and a cloud way of doing it with the help of OneDrive that Microsoft pushes right now. They've got some better ways of storing user information than doing it on the network. Of course, everything, they're trying to really push the cloud stuff, and so that's what you really want to focus on. So UEV is kind of dying out, but it is still available. Then you have AppV, Application Virtualization. AppV, in a nutshell, is a way of packaging up apps into a single file. and making that app available across the network. So imagine if you could take a program of some kind, okay, like let's say you've got a PDF editing software of some kind. You could, like Foxit or something, you could package up that Foxit PDF writing software, and you could store it on a server. Now this would mean that a user would not have to have that software installed on their computer. They could have a shortcut put on their desktop to where when they open that shortcut, it actually remotes into that package that's running on a server. It pulls it up into memory on the machine, and the person uses it remotely. All right, now that just gives you a basic idea of AppV. Another thing that's great about AppV is because the software is stored in one file, the file can be encrypted and it can be digitally signed, which means there's no way for a virus or anything like that to infect that file without the operating system knowing and making the file unusable at that point. All right, this is sort of a similar concept to how why our phones and tablets and things like that are so secure. Okay, then you got performance and assessment tools. Those are tools that allow us to scan computers for checking performance and doing assessment tests and things like that. It's good too if you're going to do upgrades. It's going to tell you if there's going to be any hardware issues, making sure that there's not going to be any hardware issues if you're doing the upgrade. So then you have Windows PE, that's the pre-installation environment. Microsoft has made this available as a separate download now, so it doesn't necessarily have to be part of the Windows 80K anymore. But Windows PE is the pre-installation environment. So when you're going to do an image, if you're going to capture an image or deploy an image, you're going to run DISM. Windows PE is a very, very lightweight command line version of Windows. It'll fit on a flash drive, it'll fit on a CD, it'll fit on a DVD. It can run across the network when you're doing imaging, but basically, and if you know what PXE is, the pre-boot execution environment, where a computer can boot up across the network with nothing on it, PE can be downloaded into memory. And basically, you can use DISM, the command called DISM, Deployment Imaging Servicing Management, to capture a Windows image or deploy a Windows image. Now again, remember, all I'm doing in this video is just giving you some basic knowledge here. I'm not going into a lot of depth here, so you might still not quite understand that. That's okay. All right. All right, and then finally, just to overview the MDT a little deeper. Remember, MDT, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, this is the analogy I use for that, is like if you were a carpenter, you would have a workbench, right? In fact, you'll notice on the screen there it says Deployment Workbench. This is a free graphical tool that Microsoft provides that helps you organize deployments and manage deployments. So that's what it's all about. Like you'll see on the screen there that it mentions applications, it mentions operating systems, it mentions out-of-box drivers, packages, task sequences, monitoring. So you can have applications that you want to deploy with your image. You can have operating systems. You have drivers that you want to include. Packages. This gets into dealing with the provisioning packages I mentioned. You have task sequences. Task sequences are little files that help automate the process of imaging. All right. But that's what the MDT is. It's the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. It's free. It's a workbench. It's a graphical tool to assist you in working with the imaging process. All right. Okay. So I hope this gives you a good overview of these deployment tools to help you understand and kind of visualize. Again, I wasn't doing any hands-on here, though I will do tons and tons of hands-on in the course here, but I wanted you to get just a little bit of an understanding of these various tools, and hopefully I've achieved that in this video. I now want to get into understanding the concepts of utilizing a migration versus rebuilding. All right, so I want to just kind of draw this out and help you visualize this. So let me just move this up here. So to start with, let's talk about migration. All right, in regards to a migration, you kind of want to look at it from the standpoint, there's two ways of looking at it. In fact, Microsoft has a tool called the User State Migration Tool that's part of the Windows 80K that's free, that'll help you with the migration. And the idea of migration is basically backing up everything somewhere, like on a user's machine, and then being able to restore that information to a new operating system perhaps that you're installing. So you got an old version of Windows, maybe you're going to put a new version of Windows on there. So let's say we've got this computer here, and we've got an older version of Windows on there. Okay, so we'll say old Windows. All right. It could be that this is a laptop, you know, or it could be a desktop. Either way, and you've got an old version of Windows on there, and the user's got all of their stuff, or what we call the user state, right? Now, the user state is all of your users' documents, desktop settings, shortcuts, screensaver, wallpaper, whatever. All of that stuff is here. Their email, all of that stuff is on this machine on their old version of Windows. Now, first, you kind of have to look at it from this standpoint. Is the user getting a new machine, or are you just doing a new operating system? All right, that's the question. Now, if you're doing a new operating system, perhaps you could just do what's called an in-place upgrade. An in-place upgrade is just an upgrade to the newer operating system. Now, there's a catch to that. Then the catch to that is, what if you got a lot of problems with this Windows? What if there's a lot of issues? Maybe you got some corrupted files and things like that. And if you upgrade to the new version of Windows, the corrupted files maybe that are involved in the applications that are on the machine will make their way into the new operating system. So maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we don't want to do an upgrade. So we've chosen to do a migration. Okay. So with that, you can, if you decided you wanted to, you could just get rid of the old version of Windows that's here and migrate to the new version of Windows that's here. All right. Now, the great thing about that is I can retain my user's information if I want. All right. If I want to retain my user's data, I can totally do that. Their user state, all of their data, all of their settings and all that. I can back all that up, blow away the machine that's there, blow away the operating system that's there, and then put a new operating system on there if I want, and then I can restore that data back to what's on the machine. Now, keep in mind that when you do a migration, you will still have to reinstall their applications. It doesn't back up their applications, but it does back up their application settings. It does back up their data and all of that stuff. All right. So I have that ability. Now, there's a couple of different ways of looking at migrate. You have what's called a side-by-side migration and a wipe and load migration. Now, if you're going to keep this older machine, you're not going to be getting a new machine. You're just going to keep the older machine and put a new version of Windows on there. Then that would be known as a wipe and load migration. Wipe and load. All right. So the idea would be you're just going to be backing up the user's data. So we'll back up state. This is called, in user state migration terms, we call this a scan state. There's actually an executable called scanstate.exe that you get with the USMT user state migration tool, which comes with Windows ADK, Windows Assessment and Deployment Toolkit, which again is free. You download it off Microsoft's website, but I'm not getting into doing that right now. I'm just trying to help you understand these concepts first here. But we back up the state, right? And then at that point, we wipe away the old operating system. So whatever the operating system is, we blow it away. And by the way, when you back up the user state, you can choose where to back it up to. If you want to back up the user state to a flash drive, you want to back it up to across the network to a server, you can totally do that. External hard drive, whatever it may be, you're just going to back up the user state. You use this scan state tool to do that, and you wipe away the old operating system. All right. At that point, you would install the new operating system. So you put new version of Windows on there, and at that point, you restore the state. And that would be what we call a load state. All right. It's called a load state. So you back up the state using scan state, wipe away the old operating system, install the new operating system, and then restore state. So that is what we call a wipe and load migration. Now, you've also got what is called a side-by-side migration. And so the idea there is, and I'm just going to cheat and copy this right here. All right. So you got an old computer. So we'll say this is a old PC. All right. And then you've got a new PC. All right. So this is going to be our new PC over here. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to migrate, use this little arrow here, you're going to migrate the user state over to this new machine. Okay, so you can basically set up the new OS. So I set up the new OS over here. So we'll say new Windows installed over here, right? And then at that point, I can back up state using scan state, and that of course is going to be done on old PC, right? And then at that point you can do a restore state, load state, right, on the new PC. All right, and so that's the idea. And of course you could have done this step here before you did that step. It really doesn't matter. Main thing is, before you do this step here, you do have to have the new operating system set up on that other machine. So hopefully you can see why that's called a side-by-side migration, because you're actually going to keep the old computer in place as you do that migration. Now the benefit too, the person is getting a new computer, so new hardware and all that. And one of the main reasons for doing that is the user's getting new hardware, right? So you're getting a new computer, a new operating system, but their big concern is, what about all of my data? Is my data going to make it over there to me? Do this new machine, what am I going to do? Well, with the help of this strategy here, you are basically able to leave that old computer you can leave it going, in fact, actually just migrate everything over, and then you just shut it down. And the great thing about it is, if things don't work as well as you planned on this new machine, you still have the old machine as a backup for a while, and then you can decommission this old machine after a while once everything is, of course, going smoothly on this new machine. Okay, so that is the idea of going through this process of migration and the concept of rebuild. So what is rebuilding? Rebuilding is having to rebuild everything from scratch. The big thing about having this migration is you backed everything up. Now, of course, if a user was to lose their machine, let's say the machine got corrupted, you lost the hard drive died, nothing was backed up. Sadly, you would have to rebuild everything from the ground up. You'd have to set up a new operating system, and the user would have lost all their data. Now, there's ways around that, and I'm not getting into all the details in this video, but Microsoft has some cloud solutions like OneDrive and all of that for backing up users' data and having all their data backed up to the cloud. It's a wonderful thing because you could literally lose your whole hard drive and you're still in business. I've actually experienced that before. I use the cloud-based solutions for backing up. And now, granted, I use, in my case, this happened with Dropbox for me because I was using Dropbox before OneDrive ever came out. But I had that situation happen on one of my laptops where I literally just had a hard drive that just died. It just died. There was not really much of a recovery. I mean, short of maybe hiring a forensics expert to try to recover some of my data, there's not anything I could have done. That hard drive was dead. But I had all of my critical information being synced to Dropbox. Now, it's the same idea with OneDrive, right? So if I did have a process, so in my case, I went out and I got a new hard drive and all that, and I had to rebuild. I had to put, the new operating system on there and all that, but everything was installed in the cloud, so I was able to do a restore. So that cloud-based solution is a great way to protect you from having to rebuild. But the idea of a migration is backing everything up, having that backup, and then when I'm now ready to do a restore, I can do a restore. And you're going to use the user state migration tool. And that's really the concepts that I need you to understand right now. Just to understand what a wipe and load migration is versus a side-by-side migration. And if you've got that down, then that's all I really need you to get down in this video. I'd now like to talk about some of the strategies involving imaging and provisioning in the Microsoft environment. Now, it's important to have a good visualization of how all this works, and this drawing is going to hopefully help you with grasping those concepts. So to start with, let's talk about traditional imaging concepts first, and then we'll discuss provisioning. In traditional imaging, the idea of this is generally you would kind of start out with setting up what is called an imaging server. Okay, so in the Windows world, we would basically set up a server on premise most of the time. This could be the latest version of server. It can actually go all the way back to Windows 2008, Windows Server 2008, in order to do this. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a new version, but it does need to be a version of server. And then what you do on that server is you install something called WDS. WDS is Windows Deployment Services, and I'll just kind of put that right here for you so you've got the acronym. Windows Deployment Services is one of the roles and features that you can install on your Windows servers. Okay, so we installed WDS, all right, and with WDS you get what's called PXE, PXE, which stands for Pre-Boot Execution Environment. I'll put that right here. If you're not familiar with PXE, PXE is a capability that allows a machine to essentially be booted off the network. So what's great about it is you literally could have nothing on a computer, and if there's a PXE service running on your network, this computer could boot off the network, get an IP address from like a DHCP server and all of that, and it could communicate in regards to this server. So this is what PXE is all about, pre-boot execution environment. Okay. The next thing that I would want to install on this server would be the Windows ADK, the Windows Assessment and Deployment Toolkit, which is going to give me, that's kind of a big acronym, let's see if we can fit it all in here, but WADK, Windows Assessment and Deployment Toolkit. Again, it's just a free series of tools you can install, free series of tools you can download and install on a machine. You can actually install that on client machines as well, but in this case, we put it on a server. And it's going to give me a series of tools like DISM, Deployment Imaging Servicing Management. I'm going to have access to Windows PE, the Windows pre-installation environment. You can download and have that with it. And then also I'm going to want MDT, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, which is the graphical tool that sort of helps me oversee imaging. Now granted, you could also put that on a different computer, but most people like to put it right there on the server. Okay, so this server is going to have a lot of various tools on it that or various services and tools on it that are going to assist me with imaging, and so this would be called our imaging service. All right, or imaging server. From there, what I would do is, let's say I need to set up like 50 machines to be identical. Maybe imagine this scenario. Imagine your company's hiring a big sales force, to help market products. Maybe your company's doing really well, but they know they need more salespeople, so they hire a big sales force. So you have to set up sales machines. So the starting point for this usually is you would have a Windows machine. Okay, so you have Windows client machine, Windows client, and this would be what we call a reference machine. Okay, reference PC. So this would be a machine that has all the software on it. So you would set it up and configure it exactly the way you need it all to be set up. So I'd take a version of Windows, I would install everything on it, configure it the way I want to configure it, install the applications on it, everything like Office and all of that would be on there. And this would be my reference machine, okay? And maybe this is going to be, you kind of have to think about like in sales, for example, you have multiple salespeople, multiple sales sub-departments. So maybe this is for what we call inside salespeople. And we have like an outside sales. And if you know the business world, you may know there's different various subcategories of sales. Maybe this is geared towards inside salespeople. You'll see why I'm doing it this way here in just a second. Okay, so from there, now that I've got my reference computer, what I want to do is capture this as an image. So what we're going to do, we would boot this computer up to capture the image. Now, in order to do that, we need to boot it into what is called Windows PE. Windows PE. So to capture an image, we need to boot this into Windows PE. All right. So the first thing also to be aware of is that this is and I just noticed that I've typoed reference PC, so let's just fix that real quick here. All right. With Windows, one thing to be aware of is that all versions of Windows that are installed, those are sometimes referred to as online images. All right. So any Windows operating system where the operating system is installed on the computer is called an online image. Now you might say, well, what if I shut that computer off and it's off? It's still considered an online image. And I'm going to explain what an offline image is in just a second. Okay, so any version of Windows that's installed is called an online image. So what you're trying to do is capture this online image, and it'll be stored in a file which is an offline image. All right, but I'll get to that more in a minute. So to capture an image, I need to be booted into Windows PE. All right, now to do that, there's various ways you can have Windows PE. Windows PE is a lightweight version of Windows. It's not graphical, it's all command line. And you can get into Windows PE by booting off Pixie, or by a DVD with it on it, a CD, or a USB drive that's got it on it. So as you can see, there are various ways that you can have something that has Windows PE on it. Pixie's probably the easiest way to do it. You got this server that's got the Pixie service running on. As long as they're on the same network, you can tell this computer to boot off the network. It'll see Pixie. It'll download Windows PE automatically into memory as long as it's been you've set all this up on this server. Okay, so from there, once that's done, I can run dism.exe to capture the image. So dism.exe is a command line tool that's inside the Windows PE environment that's going to let me basically capture this image. All right, and then what will happen is you store that image inside of an image file. Okay, now in this case, we'll just call this image file sales.wim. Now that, what you see there, that is what we call an offline image. Okay, so when it's captured in a file, it's called an offline image. All right, now here's what's really neat about it. The image file can actually contain more than one image, and you have to name the image inside the file. So I would call this image inside sales, and it'll actually have a number associated with it called an index number. In this case, index 1. The very first image inside of an image file is called index 1. Now, you may say, okay, well, wait a minute. You said it can be, you're only storing one image. What if you wanted to store multiple? Well, check this out. Where you get into a situation like this, where we have another reference computer, but instead of this being inside sales, this reference computer is configured slightly different, and this will be called outside sales. Okay, and you're going to capture that image the same way, except this time you're going to tell it to store it in this file, but it'll be called outside sales. So as you can see, you've actually got two images stored inside the same image file. And what's really neat about that too is any files that are inside that sales.wim file that are the exact same file, they don't have to have multiple copies. So the image itself can be kind of compressed down. You may say, well, does it look at the names of the files? No, it actually doesn't look at the name. It looks at the binary of the file. The binary of the file is the same. It doesn't have to reuse the same files. All right. So what you see here, this is an example of light touch installation. All right, LTI, light touch installation. It's traditional. It's the way that we have been doing it now for years and years and years. This came out, doing imaging, of course, came out in the 1990s, but this particular method of imaging became available in the year 2008 when Windows Server 2008 became available. Okay, before 2008, they had something else called RIS, Remote Installation Services, but this is how it's been ever since Server 2008 came out. This is a traditional way of doing a light touch installation. Now, why is it a light touch installation? Because I still have to put my hands on the computer. Now, I still had to put my hands on these computers to capture the image, and then also you got to put your hands on the computer when you're deploying an image as well. So imagine a scenario where I've got, let's say that these machines right here are my target machines or destination computers. Okay, so we'll say we have 50 new computers, and these are, again, these are our destination PCs. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy the image. You're going to essentially deploy the image about the exact same way that you capture the image. Let me move these acronyms just a little bit out of the way here. All right. So you're going to use deploy image, but you're going to be using WinPE and Dizzle. So it's basically the same exact thing that you did over here, but there is instead of a capture command, you'll have a different command that'll be used for deploying this image. All right, it's called apply. Most everybody uses the word deploy, but it's actually called applying an image using Dizzle. So then you can boot these machines up, tell them to boot off Windows PE by basically triggering Pixie, which is like hit a lot of times it's like F12 as the computer's booting, but it does depend on the type of computer you're using, and it will trigger to boot off the network. Now again, all of this is a light touch installation, LTI, because you're still having to put your hands on the computer. Now there is also what we call zero touch installation. To do a zero touch installation, you have to have another special server. That special server is called Microsoft Configuration Manager. All right, MCM or Microsoft Config Manager. Oops. Let me fix that. Microsoft, and then I'll put Config Manager in there. All right, now this server has had various names over the years, and its name keeps changing. It used to be, back in the 90s, it was called an SMS server, System Management Services, and then in the 2000s it became SCCM, System Center Configuration Manager. Then in the beginning of, what was it, 2020, I believe they changed it to Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, and now they just call it Microsoft Config Manager, which of course is still doing endpoint management, which is endpoints being your clients and all that. The great thing about Config Manager is it has these task sequences that are used for automation. So you can automate things. Now, granted, the MDT, the Microsoft Deployment tool, which is the workbench, has some task sequences as well, but it doesn't have all the task sequences needed for doing full automation. So the thing about Config Manager is it can communicate with your various devices, and it can tell your various devices what to do. It can tell devices to get captured, and it can tell devices to get deployed, and it can tell devices, it can tell the server information that needs to happen as well. This is what makes Config Manager special, is the fact that it can do that. It can perform a zero-touch installation and all that. So it can do all this automation. That's what makes this so powerful. That's what makes this so good. And that is what's going to give you a zero-touch deployment. So with this, with Config Manager, you get the ability to support ZTI. Now, I'll also tell you that Config Manager is not free. It's a licensed product. So you do have to have a licensed version. You have to have a licensed Config Manager. Whereas everything else you saw before I put this Config Manager on the screen is free. you have to have licensed Windows, obviously, and licensed server, but as far as all the tools go, it's all free. Okay. Now, everything you just saw there is the way we have done things now since the year 2008. Okay. There's not really anything that has changed since the year 2008 that you just saw on the screen. And I'll be honest with you, this is now, you might be just learning this for the first time and might be thinking, oh, this is a great solution for our company and all that. But let me be honest, this is not the direction Microsoft wants to go anymore. And the days are numbered. There'll be a day, it could be 10, 15, 20 years down the road, I don't know when it'll be, where they're going to probably stop supporting the older imaging solution. What Microsoft is wanting to do now is called provisioning. So this is imaging, what you just saw. This helps you visualize it. And yes, you do need to understand just the concepts here. But just know this is the old way to do it, believe it or not. And you might still be doing it in your company, and there's nothing wrong with that because it still has its place in the world. But I can tell you that Microsoft is really trying to push everybody into the newer solutions. What are the newer solutions? The newer solutions is provisioning. All right, now let's go down to this other little drawing, and this is my little domain cloud drawing. And the idea here is, let's say we have a domain. We have this Microsoft domain here. In my case, it's examlabpractice.com, and you have Azure, right? Microsoft Azure, Microsoft 365 services, and all that running out in the cloud. Now, there's two ways of doing provisioning. The first way I'll show you is the way they really want you to do it, which is to use Intune. Intune has a feature called autopilot. All right. And I'm not getting into all the details here. This is giving you this is the planning phase. This is visualizing and understanding. But autopilot is a provisioning solution. With autopilot, what I can basically do is I can buy new computers. Let's take, let me just get rid of this for just a second. All right. So I can buy new computers. And let's say that this little box, these little boxes right here, this is going to represent new computers, new PCs. Okay. And I can register this. I can learn what these machines' device IDs are. Okay. A device ID is a unique identifier. It's based on the motherboard serial number and all that on these machines, but I'm not going to get into too many details on that. But I can discover this thing called the device ID, and I can register the device IDs of these new machines. You could learn this from your provider if you're buying this from Dell or HP or whoever. And what's neat about it, you can register the device IDs into what's called Intune here, Microsoft Intune in the cloud. All right. And you can create these things called configuration profiles. Now what happens is you buy these new computers, you plug them in as long as they have an internet connection and they've already got a copy of Windows. You know, usually when you buy a computer from Dell or HP or whoever, it's already got Windows installed on it, right? So basically you plug it in, it's got Windows on. As long as there's an internet connection, it'll boot up across the internet automatically and communicate with Intune, the Intune service on the internet. And because you've registered the device IDs of these machines with your Intune service, it knows that these devices belong to you. And if you configure this thing called a device configuration profile, all right, it'll configure the out-of-box experience and all that, and Intune can deploy software down to these devices as well as reconfigure, or what they like to say, not reconfigure, they like to say reprovision these machines. Okay, that means that if there's any software on these machines you don't like, Intune Autopilot can have that stripped off. And then any software that needs to be installed on there, it can all be deployed. It can deploy policies, all of that down to these new machines. You can even do that without even having a Microsoft domain. In my drawing, I've got a domain here, but I literally could have no domain and I could do all of this. And it doesn't involve you having to blow away the hard drive and redo what's on there. Okay? That's the idea. Whereas if you get into imaging, you are, essentially blowing away hard drives and redoing things. So this is the newer solution. Now, another way of doing provisioning is not involving the cloud at all. Okay? You can actually install the Windows ADK, this little thing right here, can be installed on a computer in my domain, and I can do what's called provisioning packages. I can set up a server with, let me just get rid of this for right now. I could set up a server. Technically, it doesn't even have to be a server, to be honest with you. It could be a client operating system that you set this up on. But I can set up a server with what are called provisioning packages. All right, and that's these little files, these little files. Okay, that, let's put little writing so it looks like little files here. These little files that can tell a computer to remove software that they don't need, and that can be and also you can tell a machine to get its software reconfigured. So essentially it can do the same thing as Intune, but it's an on-premise solution. All right, so from there I could get these new machines and I could use provisioning packages to tell these machines to all get reconfigured without having to use Intune. Now there's a catch to all this. One of the beautiful things about Intune is that machines can travel. They could be anywhere in the world and Intune can manage them. With the provisioning package solution, the machines basically generally have to be on-premise. They've got to have connectivity with the server somehow. Technically it could be done over a VPN or something like that, but it's a lot harder to manage machines with provisioning packages this way than it would be to use Intune. Intune is Microsoft's main solution now for dealing with MDM, MAM. So if you really want to know the direction Microsoft really wants everybody to go, it's going to be the Intune route. But the provisioning package route is another solution that doesn't really cost anything. Okay, it's free. You download Windows ADK, you're going to get the software needed to set up provisioning packages. So again, what's the major difference from imaging versus provisioning? Imaging involves the traditional way of capturing an image, blowing away the hard drive of a computer, and then deploying that image down, whereas provisioning doesn't involve you having to blow anything away. You're just taking what's already there, whatever Windows copy that's there, and you're redoing it the way you want it to be done. Okay? All right, so hopefully now you have a grasp on visualizing the differences between imaging and provisioning. Let's go over the different Windows client editions. So the first thing to understand is there are various types of Windows editions that Microsoft has put out. This is not a new concept. Microsoft has been doing this even going as far back as the 1990s. They have released different versions of their Windows operating system. And if you think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense for somebody at home, a home user, that just needs a lot of the normal average features of Windows. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them to pay the same price as a Fortune 500 business that needs all these advanced security control capabilities, right? So this is why they do this. They release different versions of Windows, or different editions, I should say, of Windows in order to accommodate that. So you have Windows Home, you have Pro or Professional, you have Professional for workstations, Windows Enterprise, Windows Enterprise LTSC, which is the long-term servicing channel, formerly known as long-term servicing branch. You have Windows Pro Education, and then Windows Education. And there's even a few other little offshoot versions of Windows that aren't listed here. These are the ones that I want you to keep in mind. Let's take a deeper look at some of these here. So first we have Windows Home, and Windows Home gives you the average Joe everyday features that most people are going to want out of Windows. Okay, so you get Microsoft Edge. That's their web browser that's now built off of Chromium and all of that. It's very secure. It's actually rated to be the most secure web browser available today. All right, and that's not just Microsoft saying that. There's actually quite a few leading security companies out there that are saying that. You have Windows Hello, which is their authentication system. This is a biometric facial recognition, fingerprint matching, all of that stuff, multi-factor type authentication system that comes with Windows. You have virtual desktops, so you can have multiple desktops on the screen and jump between those, and to give you a little bit more task management, multitasking capabilities. You have photos, maps, mail, calendar, music, videos, and the normal stuff there. You can encrypt your device. You have firewall and virus protection. You can support something called the always-on VPN, virtual private networking. So even if you're a home user, you could use your device at home to VPN into your company's network. You have constant updates and features that are automatically being rolled out by Microsoft. Then you have Windows Pro. Windows Pro supports all the home features, but also improves and provides even more features like Windows Autopilot, which is a zero-touch based installation method that's used by a product called Intune, Endpoint Manager Intune. Okay, not getting into details a lot on that, I'm just kind of giving you an overview. You have dynamic provisioning. This supports a thing called provisioning packages for deploying changes out to the device and including the ability to deploy applications. You have MDM support, again, Microsoft's mobile device management platform, which again is Endpoint Manager Intune. All right. The ability to join domains and central control with domains. You have the ability to join Azure Active Directory, which is their cloud directory servers. You have group policy management, which essentially lets you control all the different settings and features. You have BitLocker support for encrypting your hard drive. You have support for Microsoft Purview, which gets into all this compliance control in the workplace, which ties to the compliance services or Purview services that are in the cloud. So you can control compliance from a cloud-based portal. You have Remote Desktop that lets you remote in and pull up a machine remotely as though you were physically sitting there. You have Client Hyper-V, that's hypervised. That means you can have virtual machines. You have Windows Update for Business, which gives you a little bit more control over how frequently your devices are getting updated. You have granular control for user interface or UI. That means you can control the start interface and start settings and all of that, the start menu, task menu, and all that Windows has. And you have enterprise state roaming, which allows the ability to synchronize settings that somebody configures on their Windows machine with your cloud service. So that means that if you have a user that jumps multiple machines, the settings can follow them around wherever they go. That includes application settings. So if you configure Microsoft Office settings and things like that on a Windows machine, and then you jump over to another Windows machine, those settings can follow you where you go. So then that brings us into Pro for Workstations, and essentially it's a lot like Windows Professional, but Pro for Workstation gives you a few other little features that are for more powerful machines, like the resilient file system capability. This is for supporting lots of hard drives in a machine. So if you were in like a video editing type scenario where you did some kind of video editing, you had lots of hard drives that you kept all this video on and edited. That resilient file system is for that. It's got great storage capabilities. It provides additional integrity for the data that's on your hard drive. You have persistent memory. This is a newer memory-based feature that some computers are supporting. It allows data to stay in memory when a computer is being shut down and restarted. You have SMB Direct, that's Server Message Block Direct. This is a feature that allows files to be communicated with quicker across a network. You have expanded hardware support, meaning basically they can support more powerful hardware inside the machine. Finally, you have Windows Enterprise. Windows Enterprise is the most powerful version of the different Windows editions. You have the most capabilities out of this. So you have App Locker, which allows you to have some control over what types of applications a user can use on their computer. You have Universal Printing, supporting all the various types of printers without having to have lots of special drivers. You have Start Menu Layout Control using group policy, so you can actually control the start menu layout on people's machines using group policies. You have all these Defender capabilities, Microsoft Defender Credential Guard, which encrypts the area of your computer where your passwords and all that are stored. So if a hacker was to get direct access to your computer, they couldn't get direct access to those passwords anymore, and reset passwords and things like that, which is actually very doable without some help. Without something like that. You have application control. This works in conjunction with App Locker. Actually, the two can work together to control what applications can be on somebody's machine. Except the one thing that's great about the Defender application control is the ability to control it through cloud services. You have the Microsoft Defender Application Guard. This is going to encrypt applications that are running in memory. It's going to prevent things like malware, viruses from being able to infect a application. But if a application is infected, it'll prevent the malware from being able to infect any of your operating system. You have Microsoft AppV, that's application virtualization. This allows you to do something called virtualizing applications. It's a way of storing an application in a virtual memory space, which can add additional protection. It can also make it where applications can be ran across the network and cached across the network. You have Microsoft UEV, that's a user experience virtualization. That is a feature that can synchronize user settings between machines. This is what's really kind of been replaced by the enterprise state roaming feature. And then you have desktop analytics. This allows you to gather a lot of analytic data, and it can be reported to the cloud. So a cloud-based administrator can now see all this analytic data from the machines that are on premise. You have Windows Enterprise LTSC, that's the long-term servicing channel. So you can install a special version of Windows Enterprise LTSC, or Windows Enterprise, it's the LTSC version. And essentially what this is this allows you to delay updates, feature updates on a machine. If you've ever dealt with the Windows environment very long, you know one of the issues we run into a lot of times is the fact that Microsoft will deploy some kind of a feature update and then all of a sudden it breaks our machine. So imagine if you had a machine that was over a critical part of our business, and maybe this machine is hooked up to a $500,000 piece of machinery or something, and it's controlling that machinery. And imagine that machine gets updated, and then all of a sudden that $500,000 machine isn't working right anymore because of a feature update Microsoft has deployed. So this will allow us to push off feature updates on critical machines. And they tell you here, updates will be offered and released every 2 to 3 years instead of every 6 months, with the ability of delaying updates. If you do things correctly, you could actually push off for a maximum of 10 years. But that's the norm, is the 2 to 3 years instead of every 6 months. And with the right capabilities, you can push it off even longer. Okay. Then you have Windows S mode. Okay. Windows S mode is a version of Windows that comes out, sort of a lightweight version of Windows. It doesn't support all the infrastructure for running older applications. S mode is going to require that we essentially run Windows in a method where we only support the App Store based apps, and we support Microsoft Edge. That's it. So Microsoft did this a few years ago, where they started coming out with, originally it was for their Surface tablets, but then they started supporting S mode for not just Surface tablets. And it made a lot of people mad, and mainly because it doesn't allow you to support older applications. And so a lot of people were very angry about that. Microsoft is trying to kind of move the world into the future here and say, okay, let's stop using these old applications from 10, 15 years ago, because they really, really lower our security. However, if you're like a lot of admins, and I know as a consultant, I cannot tell you how many times I've been in an environment where companies are like, oh, we have this old software we bought 10 years ago, and we got to be able to run it. And so that's a problem. So if you were to get a version of Windows that is S mode, there is a way to turn off S mode, but it's a one-way process. Once you switch off this feature called S mode, you can never go back. Okay. You basically go into the App Store, the Microsoft App Store, and you search for S mode, and there's an app you can download that'll let you switch out of S mode. And that's it. Once you're out of S mode, you can install any application you want, even older applications for the most part, and at that point you can't go back. All right. So one other quick thing here I do want to mention that I didn't kind of go over is you'll see it says I listed on one of my very first slides Windows Pro Education and Education. So Pro Education is the equivalent of Windows Pro, but is for the education system. So they offer this to the education system, and then Windows Education is the equivalent of Enterprise. for the education system. So Pro Education is the equivalent of Pro for the education system, and then Education, Windows Education, is the equivalent of Enterprise. There is no LTSC version of Education, by the way. All right, well, hopefully now that helps you understand the different editions of Windows. I'd like to now discuss a couple of offerings that Microsoft has for users that would like the ability to essentially get access to a Windows machine that's hosted in the cloud. Now, the first feature that we have available to us that we can use in the Azure environment is called Windows 365. And here I am on portal.azure.com. If I just do a search for Windows 365, you'll see I have an option right here. It says Windows 365. I can click on that, and this is something I can set up. I can configure a deployment plan and all that. But what is it? That's really what the point I'm trying to get across here. So what is it? Microsoft basically offers this as an option for users that want to basically host their Windows operating system in the cloud, okay? As opposed to buying a machine with Windows on it. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, if I buy a machine, it's already going to have Windows on it, right? So why would I want to have a computer at my office or whatever, or house, and then also pay for one that I'm getting access to online? So the logic is this. If you think about it, maybe you are a graphics artist or developer, whatever. You need a powerful machine, okay? Maybe you edit videos for a living. Think about a person that's got a piece of software that requires a lot of memory and a lot of processing power. Now, one option would be to go out and buy yourself, maybe spend a couple $1,000s on a machine that, is powerful enough to have Windows on it with the powerful graphics adapter and all that, and then run the application that's needed. And then that would be great, and that's fine. You could do that. That's an option. A company could do that, obviously. Now, another option is you could have a lesser powered machine, like what we call a thin client. Okay, and if you're not familiar with that concept of thin client, these are almost like little mini computers. They don't have really powerful processors in it or any of that. But what's beautiful about it is they're relatively inexpensive. You can buy these and you can use something like Windows 365, where Windows is hosted in the cloud with virtual CPU usage, graphics adapter support, all of that, lots of memory, lots of processing power, lots of storage, and it's basically going to be streamed down to this slower machine, but you're going to have the speed and all of that that's going to be hosted in the cloud for you, okay? The other thing is Microsoft handles all the security updates and all of that fun stuff as well. All right, so you're basically having a streamed operating system. Okay, now there's a downside, obviously, is if you lose your internet connection, you won't have access to this machine. Okay, but the upside is you can have a very powerful machine for a relatively low cost that you just pay a monthly subscription fee to, that's going to be hosted in the cloud. All right, now that's Windows 365. Windows 365 is geared towards a person that just wants access. It's a single person that's going to be using a machine. This is not really meant for any kind of shared computer or any of that. Usually it's just meant for a single user. Now, another option for companies, and this is the more robust way of handling this, as well as on a larger scale. Microsoft offers what is called Azure Virtual Desktop, formerly known as Windows Virtual Desktop. Azure Virtual Desktop, with Azure Virtual Desktop, you set up these things called host pools. So if I go back over here to portal.azure.com and I do search for Azure Virtual Desktop, okay, there's the option right there. I can create this thing called a host pool. So a host pool is going to be a group of virtual machines that essentially what happens is when a user connects into an Azure Virtual Desktop, the Azure will give them access to one of these virtual machines. Now, what's really neat about this is the user's data and profile can be stored in a central place. So it doesn't matter which of these virtual machines you get access to, because your storage is somewhere else. So it links your storage to that. So what's great about this is it can scale really, really well. In other words, right now, we've got what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, I guess 11 machines. If we needed more users, we could have that scale out to 20 machines or 30. And you, with a host pool, you essentially pay for what you're using. So if you were looking to do something like this on a larger scale, then Azure Virtual Desktop is going to be a better solution. Now, if you're talking about you're a small business, you've got a couple of graphics artists that, and I'm using graphics arts because that's definitely a field where you have apps that require a lot of memory and processing power in a lot of cases, then I would say Windows 365 is going to be the better solution. But if you're in a business environment where you're working on a larger scale, where you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 machines, 100 machines, 1,000, whatever, that you're wanting to utilize a virtual copy of Windows, then Azure Virtual Desktop is going to be the better solution. Okay, so hopefully that now clears that up for you, and you understand the benefits here. I'm not diving into configuring any of this. And the point of this video is just kind of compare and help you understand the difference between using Windows 365 versus the Azure Virtual Desktop features that Microsoft offers. I now want to get into setting up our Microsoft deployment tools and Windows ADK, the assessment and deployment toolkit. Essentially what we're going to need if we wanted to be able to support images. So what I'm going to do here, I'm sitting in front of NYC DC1, just my server that's actually domain controller as well. Now, in the real world, I normally would not install these tools on a server just because of the amount of load that you're putting on the server. But just because domain controllers have enough load as it is. But this is really the only server I've got right now. So I am going to put the tools on this server just for the lab purposes, okay? So I'm now going to open up my web browser, and I'm just going to go to Google, and I'm going to do a quick search for download Windows ADK. So we'll click on that, and you'll see Microsoft has a link here, download and install the Windows ADK. All right, so we'll go ahead and click on that. And I'm just going to scroll down, and you can just look for the latest version. And remember, this screen is going to change occasionally, so you just got to look for the latest version. So I'm going to click this right here, download the Windows ADK, and it is going to download this little executable called ADK Setup in my case, and then I'm going to go ahead and open that up. All right. And all right, so it's now asking me where I want to install this. That's fine. I'm just going to click next to that. Do you want Microsoft to collect insights? I'm going to say no. Click next. I'm going to click accept. And then from there, I can choose all these various tools that I would like to install here. All right, including VAMP, the volume license tool. If I want to install ACT, imaging configuration designer, all of this stuff here. I don't think I'm going to throw ACT on here. Well, let's see. I'll go ahead and put ACT on here. It's a smaller. It's only 8.2 megs. And then media experience analyzer for looking at graphical user interface data. There's no reason for me to put that on there. And I'm not going to put the performance tools on there right now either. Let's see. Anything else? I don't need UEV, so I'll turn that off. Just trying to conserve some disk space. Some of this I'm going to use, some of it I'm not. Some of it I'm just going to have on here. All right, but I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and install. And this, of course, is going to take a few minutes because it's got to download these tools and it's got to install the tools. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording while this is happening. All right, now that that's done, I'm just going to hit close, and if I hit start on the start button here and I scroll down, I should see a folder called Windows Kits, and that's how I know that I've got everything installed here. So that's good. And now what I'm going to do is I want to install the MDT. So we're going to go back over here to Google, and I'm just going to do a search for download MDT. And again, you could use Bing for this as well. So download MDT, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. So we'll go ahead and click on this link here. All right, and we'll click download. We're going to get the 64-bit version here. Next. All right, and it should start downloading. Okay, so as you can see, it's downloading pretty quickly here. It's just 20 megs, but ultimately, when you open this up, it's gonna, it's gonna be able to pull the rest of the files that it needs and extract everything, just like the 80K does. All right. All right, so we'll just wait on that to get finished. Now we're gonna open this up. All right, run through this little install here, accept the terms. All right, do I want to be part of the customer experience program? No, and click install. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let this get installed. All right, and we're going to now click finish. And at that point, we should have the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. All right, and if we go up to Server Manager, and this is something I want to point out, if you go into Server Manager in the server, if you don't know how to get to Server Manager, you just hit start and go to Server Manager, and you look for the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit in this list. You are not going to find it. So this is not a tool that shows up in the Server Manager, okay, environment. And even if you close out of it, open it back up, let's do that real quick, you will still not see it. Okay, a lot of times when you install new tools onto a server, if you close out of Server Manager and reopen it, you'll see the tool. But in this case, this tool does not show up in Server Manager like some of the other tools for server. That's because this is not specific to Server Manager necessarily. It's actually going to show up in your Start menu here. And then right here, we'll click Start, and then we're going to click on the Deployment Workbench. Once the Deployment Workbench opens up, you'll see a couple of objects here, one called Information Center. If I expand that out, there's just basically some documentation, some reading material, and all that. But really what we want to look at is this right here. This is the Deployment Shares. Now, that is the starting point for the MDT. You have to have what is called a deployment share. You can have more than one, but and you could base the share based on the type of maybe images that you're building if you want. But ultimately, you do have to have a deployment share to store everything in it, including your operating system images, drivers, software, things like that. So once I get here, I can just click on that, go over here and click New Deployment Share. All right, and it says it just has a default path that it throws on the C drive called Deployment Share, and I'm just going to leave that. Of course, you could put that wherever you want. And then it's going to name the deployment share $, which essentially just means that it's going to be a hidden share. It's not going to advertise the share. Machines would know that they need to look there if imaging and all that's going on. So that's fine. And then what kind of description you want to give it, I'll just call it MDT Deployment Share, which is the default. Then it asks me if I want to add some other options, additional options. So it tells you here, it says, when performing deployments, the behavior of the deployment wizard can be customized by turning various wizard panes on or off. For those that are not desired, modify the defaults below. So when you are going through a deployment, you can allow certain options to be available and show up, and certain options not. Basically, you can just customize these yourself so they're automated through, or you can make it where they pop up. I'm just going to have all of them turned on. So ask if the computer backup should be performed, ask if a product key, ask to set the local administrator password, ask if the image should be captured, ask if BitLocker should be enabled, just turn them all on. So then I'm going to click Next, and then I'm going to click Next again. And now you can see that it is going through the process of creating this deployment share. All right. So you got a little status box here that's giving you some information about all of that. Now that that's done, we're good. By the way, you can click View Script, and it basically used a PowerShell script to do this. So if you ever wanted to write a PowerShell script to create more deployment shares, this is a good example of how to do that. All right, I'm now going to click Finish, and I now have my deployment share. All right, so let's take a look at what the various options are that are available to us. So just kind of doing a rundown here, we have applications. This is where you could import applications that you would like to deploy with a image. So if I had a base image of a Windows client operating system or something, and I wanted to have an application that's going to be deployed with that image, this is where I would do that. So I have a wizard for this that would allow me to point to the application source files, put in all the information, and you can import that application in here. Then I've got operating system. So this is where our operating system images would be stored. Okay, and these image files can either be WIM files that can be pulled in, or even VHD files. All right, you've got out-of-box drivers. This is drivers that perhaps you would like to pull in. All right, so you can import drivers through here. And then you have packages. So if I go here, I can import operating system packages. And so these are going to be additional like Windows packages and security updates, service packs, language packs, all that stuff that I want to pull in. Task sequences are automation steps that you want to help to automate the process of like deploying an image. This is where you can answer questions like the product key and the operating system settings and what do you want the admin password to be and all of that. Okay, so that's the idea of a task sequence. Keep in mind that just MDT by itself cannot fully, completely automate the deployment of an image to the level of zero touch. You'd have to have Config Manager to do that, Configuration Manager, which again is a licensed product. So then you got advanced configuration. This allows you to do a few extra things like what are called selected profiles, link deployment shares, some additional media and database stuff, which I'm not going to get into all that right now. And then right here you have monitoring. Monitoring allows you to utilize monitoring within your share, but there's some things that have to be enabled for that, and database information, all that. So nothing there we're going to get into right now. Okay. All right, so that gives you just a quick rundown of how we can get our tools installed. We got the Windows ADK installed, right? And under Windows Kits here. And we've now got the MDT set up to and ready to go if we wanted to start using it and doing stuff. So that's what I really wanted to get across to you in this video, just getting the initial tools and getting the MDT configured or installed and set up. Now, if you're going to deploy an image the traditional way, light touch installation, Microsoft allows us to install a service on a server called WDS, or Windows Deployment Services. All right, Windows Deployment Services can work in conjunction with the images that we build through the MDT for deploying images. Now, I will tell you there is one ingredient we're going to need, additional ingredient we're going to need, and that is Windows PE. Windows PE will need to be installed because it is the pre-installation environment. It is a sort of a light version of Windows that runs in command line that can be downloaded into memory when an image is going to be installed. So it's sort of like a very lightweight operating system that allows us to install our full operating system. So we need to get Windows PE installed. All right. To do that, we actually just go back to where we installed ADK. If we go to Google and just type download Windows ADK, go here again. All right, and granted, we could have just installed this before if we wanted to. We don't have to. We could have went ahead and just installed it right after we did ADK, but I didn't. So I'm going to go right here. I'm going to get download Windows PE add-on for Windows ADK. All right, so you let that get done, install it or downloading. We're going to click open. All right, click next. All right, next, accept their agreement. Okay, and click install. All right, I'll go ahead and pause the recording while that's getting installed. All right, now that that's done, I'm just going to hit close, and we're going to go back into Server Manager here. All right, and this is going to act as our Windows deployment services. So we're going to go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. We're going to click Next, Next, and Next. And I am going to choose down here where it says Windows Deployment Services. Add the feature. We're going to click Next, Next, Next. And we are going to install the deployment services as well as what is called the transport services. Transport services allows images to be transported across the network with multicasting and all of that. We'll just have both of those roles. We'll click Next, and we're going to click Install. All right. So at that point, we will, I'll just pause the recording while that's getting installed. All right, now we're going to hit close, and I'm going to go to Tools, and we'll open up Windows Deployment Services now. All right, once that is open, okay, we'll go right here to under Servers, expand that out, and you'll see that there is a little warning symbol that's letting us know that our server is not configured. So we're just going to right-click that and click Configure Server. Okay, I'm going to click Next, and it's asking me if this is going to be integrated with Active Directory or if it's a standalone server. So I am going to go ahead and tell it can be integrated with Active Directory. All right, so we'll click Next, and then it's going to ask me where I want to store all of the information, like images and stuff, while things are being installed. It's just going to create a folder on the C drive called Remote Install. In a perfect world, you might have this on a separate, hard drive or whatever on a server, but we'll just leave that as the default here. We'll click Next. Okay, then it's just telling you the volume selected is also the operating system. It's just recommending you put it on a different drive. I'm going to click yes to that. That's fine. Then it's asking me about Pixie. Remember that Pixie is pre-boot execution environment. This is a service that can respond to machines across a network. So again, you could be booting a computer up that literally has nothing on the hard drive. As long as it supports Pixie, which it probably does. Pixie's been around for a very long time, going back to the early 2000s. And from there, you essentially can tell the computer to boot off the network, and it'll talk to this. It'll download Windows PE, and then the image can be deployed. So we're just going to say go ahead and respond to all client computers. So I'm going to click Next. All right, and as you can see, it is copying the files it needs and configuring what it needs, starting the Windows deployment services up. So it's now officially able to start the deployment services up. And then it's asking me if I want to go ahead and add images to the server now. And I'm not going to, because I don't have any images to add right now. So we're just going to hit Finish, or turn that off, and then hit Finish. And that's all we really need to do to that to get the initial Windows deployment services configured. Now what I want to do is I'm going to download a Windows ISO file. And so what I'm going to do is open up my web browser, and I'm going to go to examlabpractice.com/ISO download. And I usually keep the latest ISO files on here for you guys. So of course, if for some reason my link doesn't work, you can always go to Google and just do a search for download like Windows 11 ISO or whatever version you want. In this case, I'm going to do Windows 11. So we just basically go to this link here. And when you go to this link, it should take you to where you can download this. So when you click this, of course, you have to fill out their little form. I don't even put legit information in there usually. And you don't have to put a real email address if you don't want. From there, you'll come to this screen here, and you can click download. Now I went ahead and did this ahead of time so that I've already got the ISO and I'm not having to sit here waiting. So the ISO should be showing up inside my downloads folder, and there it is right there. Okay, so and I'm just going to rename it to Windows 11 int.iso. All right, at that point I'm going to right click this, and I'm going to mount it, which is sort of like if this was like on a DVD. Okay, so we're going to mount this, and at that point it should be able to show up on my my drives here. Sometimes that does take a moment, so we may have to give that just a moment before it starts showing up, but it should be showing up once it officially gets loaded and all that. There it is right there. Okay, All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the MDT. So we can get into the MDT by clicking Start and going to the Deployment Workbench. So here it is right here, and I'm going to go to where it says Operating Systems, and I'm going to click Import Operating Systems. So then it asks me, if I want to pull from a full set of source files, that includes DVD, CD, that's going to be the one I go with. You could also do a custom image if you already had a WIM image that you maybe had captured an image or something. And then if you want to do deployment services image, add images from your Windows deployment servers. Now, if you had an image on Windows deployment services already, you could import it in here, but we don't. So we're going to go right here, full set of source image. We're going to click Next. And then where's your source directory? So we'll click Browse, and we should just be able to point to that D drive here. Okay, so we'll click that, and it should be able to detect everything from there. So we'll hit Next. All right. Looks like it's just taking a moment here to load everything and detect everything. All right, and then it tells you what version of Windows you're looking at here, Windows 11 Enterprise Evaluation, so that's fine. We'll click Next, and it says, all right, it's just summarizing what we're doing here. That's fine. We'll click Next on that, and it's now going through the process of performing the import. And so we're going to go ahead and let that run through. I'll pause the recording while that's being imported. All right, now that that's done, I'm going to hit Finish, and I should notice that the image is showing up right here. So we've got our WIM file. This is just if you were just to deploy this, you would just be deploying the initial version of Windows with no applications or any of that. But what if we do want application? So we'll come over here to Applications, and I tell you what, why don't we download something? Let's go and let's download 7-zip. 7-zip is just a more powerful unzipping and zipping product than what comes with Windows, and it's very quick. So download 7-zip. All right, let's find that real quick. So here we go, 7-zip download page, and let's just grab the 64-bit version of 7-zip MSI file. So that's going to be this version right here. Okay, so we'll just quickly download that. All right, so it's not a very big program. That's why I kind of like this one. And let's just put it in its own folder. So I'm just going to create a folder called 7-zip on the C drive, and we'll just paste it into that. All right, so now we are going to go back over to our MDT, right-click Applications, New Application. Okay, we can specify the source files where the application is going to be. It could be across the network if we wanted. Okay, you can also do what is called an application bundle, bundled applications together, but we're going to go with application source files. We're going to click Next. Not going to put a publisher. I'm just going to call this 7-zip for the name. Not going to worry about version or language. Then I'm going to specify the source directory, which is going to be on the C drive 7-zip folder. We'll click Next. Oh, and by the way, you can move the files in the deployment share instead of just copying them if you want, but I'm just going to have it copied. That's just to save disk space. So we'll click Next. All right. Next. And then this right here, you got to have a command for installing MSI files. And generally speaking, the way this command works, if you didn't know, there is a command called MSI exec. Okay, and the MSI exec command is the command that is used for installing and deploying MSI files. All right, which are called Microsoft installer packages. So I'm going to type MSI exec.exe. Of course, if you were to look this up in Microsoft documentation, you would see all of this. But MSI exec.exe/i, which basically means install, and then whatever the 7-zip MSI file is, right? So what is that 7-zip MSI file? Let's go look at it. So there it is right there. So I'm just going to copy that, the name of that, and we'll just paste that in and put a .msi extension on the end of it. And then we're going to do a /q, which just means quiet. It means just install quiet. All right. So I think I've got everything typed correctly. There are no typos, it looks like. So now we are going to click Next, and next, and now it's going to import this into the deployment share. Click finish, and we've now imported our application. Now I'm going to create a task sequence. Now if you didn't know, a task sequence is a object that is going to help with the process of the image being installed. And also, if you were going to capture an image, you can use task sequences for capturing images as well, especially if you're using Config Manager. You can automate all that. But if in this case I want to deploy an image, I'm going to use the I'm going to create a task sequence that's going to do that. So it's a series of steps. A task sequence is basically an object that is going to be a series of steps that's going to help with the process of doing something, whether it's capturing an image or deploying an image. So I'm going to go right here, click task sequence. I can either right click or click new task sequence on the right, give it an ID. I'm just going to call this Win1101 as my, maybe this is the ID I'm giving it. And then give the task sequence a name. We're going to say Windows 11 deployment. Okay. And then we'll click next. All right. And then you have a series of different options here you can go with. In our case, we're just going to use a standard client task sequence because we are deploying a client operating system here. So we'll click next. We're going to choose our operating system that we're wanting to deploy, which is going to be Windows 11. We're going to click next. Then if we wanted to put a product key in here, we could. I'm going to say do not apply a product key at this time, especially if I was going to use Microsoft 365, E3, E5 licenses or whatever. It's all just going to, it'll get linked to the user when they authenticate anyway. But I'm just going to say do not. We're going to click next. And then full name, let's have that's going to be Windows user. I'm going to say exam lab practice for the organization. And then I'm going to put in my website, examlabpractice.com. as the home page. So we'll click next. Then let's give it an administrator password, just whatever password you want to use for the local administrator on the machine. Then we're going to click next, and then we're going to click next again, and our task sequence has now been created. If I right click the Windows 11 deployment share and go to properties, and I can actually see the task sequence steps here. And if you really get hardcore into imaging, you'll get really familiar with kind of looking at the different steps and tweaking different things. You can even create custom scripts that can run and do things while this is happening. Okay, it's kind of outside the scope of what we're looking at, but I did want to point that out. Pretty neat, all right, that you stuff here you can play with. And if you ever decide to get into the zero-touch installation world with Config Manager, it's definitely something you can get deep into. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of that. Nothing there I need to do. I've got my task sequence created. Now we need to do some things to our deployment share real quick. So we're going to come up here to where our deployment share is. We're going to right click that. We're going to go to properties. We're going to turn off x86 because we don't need it. So we're going to hit apply. Okay, now let me warn you that there, at least at the creation of this video, with the latest version of ADK and PE and all that, there has been an error. There's a bug that occurs, and I'm going to show you real quick how we can fix this bug if you get it. Now, when you do this, Microsoft might have already fixed this problem, and you may not experience it if you're doing this with me. And if you're not doing this with me, that's not a problem. Lots of people just like to watch me demonstrate these things, but if you are doing this in your own environment, when you click Windows PE, you may get an MMC error. All right, and there's the error. Okay, so this error, this bug, from the best of what I've discovered, is it involves x86. This is an x86 problem. So what we're going to do, we're going to terminate this with Task Manager. So we're going to right-click Taskbar, go to Task Manager, and we are going to terminate the MMC. All right, that's going to kill the MDT. It's going to close out. There is an article that I found on this. If you do a Google search, you could find it. Deployment workbench crashes when opening Windows PE. And somebody provided a quick, easy way to fix this. And it's not the accepted answer. It's this right here. This person tells you that, again, this has to do with the x86. If you create a folder in program files x86, Windows kits, 10, assessment deployment, pre-installation, you got to create the x86 folder and then create this folder right here. Okay, so I've opened that up. Here it is right here. So C drive, program files. So C drive, let's just go to it. C drive, program files x86, Windows kits, 10, all right, assessment and deployment kit, all right, and then Windows pre-installation environment. This x86 folder may not exist, so you have to create it. Just right click, new, create it, and then I'm going to create this folder inside there. Name it that right there, Windows PE, WinPE_OCS, just like this right here is telling you. That should solve our problem. So let's go back, start, let's go to Windows Deployment Workbench, open that up, we'll expand our deployment share, we're going to go to the properties of our deployment share, make sure x86 is turned off, then hit rules, or sorry, Windows PE, and there you go, no error this time. So we're going to switch to 64-bit, all right? We're going to turn off the generate ISO. We do not need it to generate an ISO. Now in the real world, if you wanted to generate an ISO, it's like a DVD, or it could be put on a DVD, it could be mounted on a flash drive, you could boot up and go from there. But that's basically what that is going to do for us, all right? And then down here it says a generic boot image is useful for troubleshooting purposes. It contains all the same components and drivers but no scripts. If we want to generate a generic Windows PE image, we could, or generic ISO, we could. In the middle here we've got custom background bitmap. We can do a custom bitmap image like of our company logo. So there's a few things there you could do, but the only other thing I'm going to hit apply on that, and then I'm going to go to monitoring, and I am going to turn on enable monitoring so we can get some monitoring for our deployment share. So we'll hit apply on that, and all that should be applied. We can click OK, and now you'll notice that monitoring is available. All right, so that now we've got that all set up. Now I'm going to go up to the deployment share. I'm going to right click that and tell it to update the deployment share with all the changes. So we're going to click that, and we're going to tell it to completely regenerate boot images because we did alter some of the settings inside that deployment share. Click next. All right, click next, and it's going to go ahead and do that. Now the great thing about this is going to create us the boot image that'll be needed when we get into our Windows deployment services. We will have to have a boot image, which is going to essentially have Windows PE built into it, which is what will be used for managing the deployment. It can also include the task sequences and all that stuff. So that's what's going on right here. It's going through that process of creating that WIM files. You can see it's mounting it, and it's going to go ahead and create it. Now I'm going to click Finish, and I should be able to go into Windows Deployment Services. So we'll go up here to Server Manager, back into Windows Deployment Services by hitting Tools and expand Server. And we'll go to Boot Images, and we'll right click and we'll say Add Image. And we should be able to hit Browse to our deployment share here, and then go to Boot. And there is our image right there. Okay, so that was the image that's just been created. So we're just going to go ahead and open that. Click Next. So it's Light Touch Windows PE. That's fine. Next, and next again. And it's going to go ahead now, and it's going to import that image into our Windows deployment services. All right, which of course in the end is going to allow us for deploying an image, right? All right. So we'll let that get imported, and we'll click Finish, and then our boot image is now showing up. Now that we have that boot image, we could actually boot into it if we wanted just to see it work. And if we open up Hyper-V, here's Hyper-V. Now keep in mind I have a couple of virtual machines. This is the DC that I'm running, and I've shut down my Client 11 box just to save on memory. But if I click New Virtual Machine, Next, we'll just say Win11 image deploy demo is what I'm going to call that. So we'll click Next, just do Generation 2. Hey, real quick, I am adding a little edit, making a little edit to this video because I had been getting messaged from a few people saying they were having some problems with Generation 2 virtual machines. So I wanted to clarify right now that even though you saw me in the video choose generation 2, you can absolutely make the virtual machine a generation 1. So my advice is, if you want, select generation 2, continue on when you're creating the virtual machine. However, if you have problems getting this to work, then delete the virtual machine, recreate a new virtual machine, all right, and then choose generation 1 and then continue on from there, okay? So again, if for some reason you can't get generation 2 to work, then just delete the virtual machine and then use generation 1, all right? If your computer's having problems getting generation 2 to work, just use generation 1. It's not, honestly, it is not going to make a big difference at all. The only difference really will be just the virtual machine will take a little bit longer to boot up, as opposed to booting up quick. So it's not a big deal. It's not going to make a big difference. If you use generation 1, my advice is, if you can't get generation 2 to work, go ahead and use generation 1. You do not have to message me about this. Just go ahead and use generation 1 and then continue on. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and end this little edit, and the video is going to pick right back up where it used to pick up. I'm going to give it, let's just give it 3 gigs of RAM, turn that off. Next, we'll set this to external switch. Whatever my external switch is, got to make sure it's connected to the same switch as my domain controller. Just take the default on the hard drive. We'll click next. We'll say install operating system later, because this is actually going to happen over the network. We'll click next and then finish. All right, and then if I right click and hit connect, and now we're going to tell it to start. Okay, so we'll start it up. Hopefully I've got enough memory. If I don't, I'll have to close some things in order to accommodate the memory. Okay, looks like I do. So notice that it tells you it's starting Pixie, and I did hit enter because it does ask you real quick to, hit enter if you want to go into Pixie. So I did, and notice it's loading that boot image. It's basically loading up that WIM image for me. So there it is, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit right here. So it's actually pulling that up and loading it up like it's supposed to. Now I'm going to click Run the Deployment Wizard to install. All right, and essentially what I would then do is I would go ahead and fill everything out that I want to fill out, user credentials and all that. But I want to hold off on that for just a moment, because I want to show you a couple things. All right, so I want to jump back into my domain controller, which has my Windows deployment services installed on it. All right, and I want to take a look back on MDT. So let's jump back over to MDT, and I'm going to right click my deployment share, go to properties, and we're going to look at the rules area here. So this is going to let us automate some of the different pop-ups and stuff that the wizard is going to want to show on the screen. As you saw, I was asking for the admin password and all that. So we can get around that a couple of ways. Number one, and I've actually pre-created some information that you could copy into your own environment if you wanted to, and I'll put it up on the screen right here. So first thing I want to do though is edit the bootstrap.ini. So this is where I can supply admin password information and all that. I've got a copy of my data right here that I like to use, so I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to paste that into this bootstrap ini. So it's just telling you all this is the same, but I am going to put the user ID as administrator and the domain is examlabpractice.com, specifying a keyboard locale, and I'm telling it to skip that welcome screen. So we're going to hit save on that, close out of that, and then I also make a few changes to these rules to help automate things as well. And all this can be found online. Like if you wanted to learn all of the parameters that you can use, Microsoft has documents out there available. So I'm going to copy this data, and you're welcome to, you could essentially use the same thing as me here. But most of the beginning is this is the same. Okay. Of course, I do want to. I am telling it to skip a couple of things, tell it to skip the welcome and all that, which you notice that I left the E off there, so let me fix that. So skip the BDD welcome, skip capture, skip admin password, skip product key, skip computer backup, skip BitLocker, skip user data. This gets into trying to migrate user data in this example because I'm not really getting into that right now. Skip time zone. I'm going to go ahead and tell it no on that one. Skip locale selection. Join domain equals examlabpractice.com. Machine object OU is going to be OU. This is where the machine account will go in Active Directory. However, I don't have that OU yet, so I need to fix that. Let's go here to Server Manager, Active Directory users and computers, and we're just going to create a OU called workstations on my domain. OU is just a container. Right, so organizational unit, we'll call it workstations. All right, and now we've got that. So let's go back over here and pull that back up. I might have to minimize some stuff to see it. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so workstations, make sure that matches what I've got. Yep, workstations. So OU equals workstation, comma, DC equals exam lab practice, comma, DC equals com. You can't just put examlabpractice.com because Active Directory doesn't allow you to use dots for its LDAP naming convention. Keyboard locale E and US, and then the event service for monitoring and all that will be this right here. All right. So now I have got all of that entered in. I'm going to click OK. The next thing I need to do is I need to update. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to click update the deployment share. Completely regenerate new boot images. So we're going to do that because we did make some changes. Since we made those changes, we do need to go back through the process of regenerating those boot images, or that boot image I should say in this case, because it's just one. It just dawned on me as I was doing this that I forgot to add an admin password to our config. So actually I'm going to have to do this again. So I'm going to hit finish. I'm just going to go here to properties, back over here to rules, and we're going to go to edit the bootstrap, and the password line is going to go right here. So that's user password equals, and I'm just going to use this password here, capital P lowercase a 55w.rd. Okay. Which of course is what my admin password is currently for my domain. So I'm going to save that and click OK, and we're going to go and do this process again real quick. Of course, it's going to be very quick for you because I'm just going to pause it while it's happening. So we'll say update, completely regenerate, and there we go. Now I'm going to hit finish, and I'm going to go back over to Windows Deployment Services, all right? And we're going to update our boot image here. So we'll just right click that and we're going to say replace image, browse. We'll browse back to that same image that was just updated. All right. Double click on that, next, 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 and it's now going to replace that boot image. All right, so it is done. So if I just hit finish, now let's jump back over. I'm going to jump back into my virtual machine here that was in the process of being deployed, and I'm actually just going to tell it to we're just going to turn it off, and then we're just going to turn it back on. All right, so we'll hit start that back up. All right, starting with Pixie, hitting enter on network boot. It's loading the light touch PE. All right, so we'll just let that load up here. Remember, it doesn't have a lot of memory in my case, so it is going to be a little bit slow here as it tries to load up. And in a perfect world, you'd have more memory going on to this, but I think we're adequate to at least get this thing loading. All right. All right, so getting local computer information, as you can see here, all that's working. So you notice it didn't ask me as many questions this time. Sometimes these little script errors will pop up. I wouldn't worry too much about it. So we'll just close out of that. Now, next thing is select a task sequence to execute on this computer. We'll select this Windows 11 deployment. All right, do I want to join the domain? Yes. What do I want to name the computer? I'll just call it Win11 Demo. All right. Join the domain, examlabpractice.com. It's going to put it in this. You can just, obviously, you could check everything, make sure everything's good, and then we would click Next. Okay, language settings, we want to set our time zone, we can, whatever you want the time zone to be. Okay. There is the application to install. Select that. Ready to begin. And there you go. We are now officially imaging the machine. So it's going through the process and deploying. And that's basically the process right there of deploying an image. After all that loads, it reboots and you get this getting ready message. So you can see that it is getting ready to pull everything up. So I just wanted to show you that real quick. All right, I finally reached a log on screen here. So as you can see, it is giving me the ability to log on if I want to log on. I can put my credentials in and go ahead and authenticate. Now you will notice too that it's not completely done, so I'm going to give it some more time. Okay, so now you'll notice that I've got the Windows screen background, but there was still a few things that it had to do, and now it's going to restart again. All right, so almost done here, restoring user state, all that stuff, setting all that up. And I also saw a message right before I started the recording. It said it was installing 7-zip, so our application's being installed as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording again and let this finish up. Okay, now that's it. Now, I do want to warn you that in our little lab environment, our virtual machine would not have joined the domain, and the reason is because of the way this lab is set up. My client machine has gotten an IP address from my own internet connection, DHCP, and which is pointing to my ISP for DNS. It's not pointing to my domain controller for DNS. Now, in the real world, on your on-premise network, you would have been pointing to your DHCP service would be pointing to your company's DNS server, and you wouldn't have had this problem. It would have joined to the domain. But in my case, my client machine did not join my domain for that reason. Let me show you what happens. See, like right now, if the domain controller, if the machine tries to join the domain, okay, it's going to run into a problem. The problem being that it can't resolve the domain name. If I go over here to System and Settings, and I go right here to About, scroll down to where it says Domain or Work Group, and then click Change and try to join my domain, which is Exam Lab Practice, and I just hit OK. It's not going to be able to find it. Like if let me put my credentials in, you'll see here. All right, so it would be attempting at this point to try to join the domain, right? It's gonna try to locate the domain controller. The problem is that it's pointing to my ISP's DNS, right? If I go to command prompt right now, or PowerShell, whatever, I'll go to terminal, which is PowerShell, and I type ipconfig/all, I'm going to notice that it's getting an IP address from my own network, which is in turn pointing to my router, which is in turn pointing to my ISP for DNS, and that's not going to work. It's got to be able to resolve the name. So you can see right there, DHCP service and DNS. See, it's pointing to my router. So I'm going to fix that, all right, so that we can manually join the domain. In the real world, though, our image would have joined to the domain. It wouldn't have had a problem, okay? So there's the error. So it got an error. Let's fix this problem, okay? So if I right-click, go to Network and Internet Settings here, I'm going to click on Ethernet, all right, and we're going to go down here to where it's this DNS server assignment, and I'm going to switch that to manual, all right, and IPv4, we'll set that to what we want as our preferred DNS, and we need to know what our domain controller's IP address is. So I'm going to go over to my domain controller, all right, and go to, actually I can look, better yet, actually I think quickest way is going to be ipconfig. So I'll go to command prompt and I'll just type ipconfig, and it's 1.141. So 192.168, 1.141. That is my domain short in my case. All right. So we'll jump back over there. 192.168, 1.141. All right. And then I'm going to leave the rest of this alone. Hit save. All right. And now let's just refresh this ipconfig/all. And let's see what we've got. All right. So we got DNS servers. It's still showing v6 enabled. Let's fix that real quick. I'm going to go to control panel, just hit start, go to control panel, and we're going to make 100% sure that v6, because IPv6 can sometimes interfere with stuff based on, you know, the ISP that you're using. It can cause a few issues for us here, and I find it safer just to do this through control panel. So if I go to large icons, I'm going to go to network and internet settings here, and we'll find change adapter settings, and I'm going to right click Ethernet, go to properties, and we are going to turn off IPv6. We check our v4, we should have that. Yep, all that's correct. We'll click OK, click close, and now let's see if we can go back over here to system. All right. And go to about, and we'll scroll down here to domain or work group, click change this to exam lab practice. You don't have to put the .com on the end of that, and then we'll put in exam lab practice /administrator and put my password in here. All right, we got our message. Welcome to the exam lab practice domain. All right, so we are now joined to the domain. It tells you that it does need to restart the computer. So I am going to go ahead and let it restart. And that is where I'm going to end things in this video. So you've seen the whole process. I know it was a lengthy process, but hopefully you've seen the whole process now, and you have a much better understanding of imaging with MDT in the Windows network world. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed getting to experience a little bit of this course, and I hope you'll join me on the full adventure. If you'll check the description of this video, you'll see a link that'll show you how you can get access to the full course. Now, in the full course, you're going to learn how to set up a practice environment where you can practice hands-on, and I'm going to provide you with lots of virtual simulations that you can do 24/7. All you need is a web browser. So I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll also give me a like and subscribe. I'm trying very, very hard to get this channel to build and grow, and so I hope you'll take the time to do that.